Hey guys, tonight we're not just looking at old bones. We are stepping into a cosmic casino, placing a bet against odds so vast they make winning the lottery look like a sure thing. We're going on a journey to understand why finding any fossil is a miracle, and why finding the ones we're about to see is something else entirely. Imagine you are standing on a vast, quiet plain 70 million years ago. The air is thick and warm. Before you lies the body of a colossal hadrosaur, its life extinguished by age or thirst. It is a mountain of flesh and bone, a library of biological information, silent now under the Cretaceous sun. But in that stillness, our focus narrows. We are not looking at the whole creature, but at a single immense femur, a thigh bone thicker than you are tall. This one bone, right here, is a potential message in a bottle, a single word from a lost language. Over millions of years, it will be hunted by forces that want to erase it, to grind it back into the dust from which it came. It will be crushed, dissolved, and forgotten. Its story lost to an indifferent universe. So how could it possibly survive? What lottery must it win to reach us? And what does it mean when we find fossils that seem to have cheated the game entirely, preserving moments so specific and so unlikely they simply shouldn't exist? Thanks to the tireless work of fossil hunters and the incredible luck of geology, tonight we will venture into the deep past to find the answers, to witness the stories of these impossible survivors. Frankly, if you were a bone, your odds of making it through the next 70 million years are statistically indistinguishable from zero. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning while holding a winning lottery ticket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm that long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your watch begins over that single bone. Before the sun sets, the first challengers arrive. You see them first as specks in the sky, circling, patient. Vultures of a prehistoric kind, they descend with a rustle of immense wings, their sharp beaks tearing at hide and sinew. They are the first wave of nature's cleanup crew, an incredibly efficient, if somewhat gruesome, recycling program. They pull away the flesh, exposing the skeleton to the air. They are followed by smaller terrestrial scavengers, nimble, furry mammals that dart in to steal a mouthful, their sharp teeth scoring the very surface of the bone you're watching. The great femur is too large for them to carry off, which is its first stroke of luck. Smaller bones are scattered across the plain, their stories ending right here, destined to be bleached by the sun and scattered by the wind. But the assault is not over. It simply changes scale. Now the true army of erasure arrives, the one you cannot see. Trillions upon trillions of microbes, bacteria, and fungi begin their work. You are witnessing the relentless process of decay. They swarm over the remaining tissues, the cartilage, the ligaments, breaking down the complex organic molecules into simpler components. They are turning a magnificent creature back into soil and air. This microscopic legion even begins to work on the bone itself, seeking out the last vestiges of protein and marrow held within its porous structure. Time, you realize, is not just a passive river carrying things along. It is an active, grinding force, an engine of entropy that seeks to dismantle everything. And its primary agents are the smallest things alive. Days turn into weeks. The sun beats down, a merciless hammer of ultraviolet radiation that bleaches the bone white and creates microscopic fractures across its surface. Then the rains come, soaking the bone, and as the water seeps into those tiny cracks, it carries with it acids from the soil, ever so slowly dissolving the mineral structure. At night, the temperature plummets. The water inside the cracks freezes, expands, and widens the fractures. Freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw. It's a slow, powerful wedge being driven into the heart of your bone. It seems impossible that anything could survive this relentless elemental gauntlet. And the truth is, most don't. The sheer statistical noise of existence means that almost everything that has ever lived simply vanished. It's a sobering thought that for all the magnificent creatures we know about, they represent a fraction of the life that has graced this planet. The mainstream historical fact, which is almost too large to comprehend, is that less than 1% of all species that have ever lived are known to us through the fossil record. The rest are gone without a trace. Of course, there are exceptions. Every now and then, conditions are perfect. We call these sites Lagerstätten, a German word for storage places. These are the VIP lounges of fossilization. Imagine an ancient lagoon where the water is so salty and low in oxygen that the usual bacteria of decay can't survive. Creatures that fall in are pickled in a perfect brine, preserving details down to their skin and eyeballs. The Solnhofen limestone in Germany, which gave us the first Archaeopteryx, is one of these fossil jackpots. This quirky tidbit highlights how these exceptional sites are the only reason we have such a detailed picture of certain ecosystems. They are windows that miraculously failed to close. But for your bone, out here on the open plain, no such luck seems forthcoming. For it to become a fossil, a very specific chain of events must begin. The slow, patient work of mineralization, of turning bone to stone, is a chemical process known as diagenesis. Imagine every microscopic particle of the original bone mineral, the calcium phosphate, being slowly, molecule by molecule, swapped out. Water, rich in dissolved minerals like silica or calcite, percolates through the bone. As the original material dissolves, a mineral crystal takes its place, forming a perfect stone-cast replica. This is not a coating, it is a fundamental transformation. The bone must survive long enough in a stable underground environment for this incredibly slow process to complete. It must be buried, safe from the sun and the frost, for the magic to happen. This is the scientific evidence, the quiet chemistry that underpins every fossil you've ever seen. And it raises a profound question that paleontologists still wrestle with. Given this brutal, multi-stage filter of destruction and preservation, what are we actually seeing in the fossil record? Historians still argue whether the fossil record is a representative sample of past life or a heavily biased freak show of only the most durable or lucky organisms. Are we reading a true history of life, or just the crumpled pages that happened to survive the fire? The answer to whether you're witnessing a true history or a freak show is both, and it all hinges on the next few moments. Your bone lies exposed on that Cretaceous floodplain, a fragile relic on the verge of becoming dust. It has survived the scavengers and the first attacks of the elements, but it is losing the war of attrition. For it to be saved, it needs a ticket out of this world of oxygen and decay. It needs a burial. and it needs one now. Suddenly, the air changes. A distant rumble grows into a roar, not of an animal, but of the landscape itself. A storm, far up in the highlands, has unleashed a torrent of rain, and now a flash flood is surging down the ancient riverbed. You see a wall of brown water, churning with mud, uprooted trees, and the unfortunate bodies of smaller creatures caught in its path. Your hadros or femur, heavy as it is lifted and tumbled in the violent current. This is another moment of extreme risk. It could be smashed against a rock and shattered into 1,000 pieces, but instead it is carried along, cushioned by the thick slurry of mud, until the raging water overflows the river's banks and spreads out across the plain. As the energy of the flood dissipates, everything it was carrying begins to drop. The bone settles onto the ground, and in a matter of hours, a thick blanket of sand, silt, and mud covers it completely. The sun can no longer reach it. The wind cannot scour it. It is safe. This single violent event, rapid burial, is the most critical step in the entire process. It could have been a landslide, a sudden collapse of a hillside that entombs everything below in a chaotic jumble of rock and soil. Or it could have been the sky itself turning against it. Imagine a nearby volcano erupting, sending a vast plume of ash into the atmosphere. For days, a grey, gritty snow would fall, silently blanketing the landscape, suffocating life, and burying the remains in a layer of what will one day become tuff or bentonite clay. This ash is a fossil maker's best friend. But it's the environment within the burial that truly matters. Down here, beneath the surface, the oxygen is quickly used up by microbes, and a new anoxic world takes over. This is the key. Without oxygen, the most destructive bacteria simply cannot function. The process of decay grinds to a near halt. You can see this today in the La Brea tar pits, where thick, bubbling asphalt has seeped up from the earth for tens of thousands of years. Animals would wander into the sticky pools, become trapped, and sink down into a perfectly oxygen-free environment, preserving their bones in stunning detail. Your bone, buried in the waterlogged mud of the flood, has found its own version of this sanctuary. Now begins the long, quiet wait. More floods will come, year after year, century after century, piling more and more sediment on top. The weight becomes immense. You have to imagine the pressure of hundreds, then thousands of feet of rock pressing down. This pressure squeezes out the last pockets of water and compacts the sediment into solid stone, sandstone, mudstone, shale. The bone is now locked in a geological vault. Deep underground, groundwater, carrying its cocktail of dissolved minerals, continues its slow work, seeping through the rock and into the bone. This is the slow cook, the patient process of permineralization we spoke of. For millions of years, this alchemy continues in the dark. This is how a piece of a living creature becomes a part of the earth itself. And this is not just a hypothetical scenario. This sequence of river floods is precisely what created the famous Morrison Formation in the western United States. This mainstream historical fact explains why places like Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming are a paradise for paleontologists, yielding a treasure trove of Jurassic giants like Stegosaurus and Brontosaurus that were buried in these ancient river systems. But what's fascinating is that sometimes the Earth preserves more than just the body. This quirky tidbit often surprises people. There's a whole category of fossils called trace fossils, or ichnofossils, that are like ancient ghosts. They don't record the creature itself, but its behavior. A set of dinosaur footprints hardened in ancient mud tells you not just that the creature was there, but how it walked, whether it was running, and maybe even that it was traveling in a herd. A fossilized burrow reveals the hidden life of a prehistoric mammal. And yes, paleontologists get incredibly excited about finding coprolites. Fossilized poop. As funny as it sounds, they are a direct window into an animal's diet. It's one thing to guess a T-Rex ate other dinosaurs. It's another to find fragments of a Triceratops frill inside its fossilized droppings. To know how long our bone has been cooking, scientists rely on one of the most elegant tools in their arsenal, and it's all thanks to those volcanoes we mentioned. If a volcanic eruption lays down a blanket of ash above or below our fossil, that ash contains the scientific evidence needed for a precise date. The ash contains tiny crystals with radioactive elements, like uranium. From the moment it cools, that uranium starts to decay into lead at a perfectly fixed, predictable rate, like an atomic clock. By measuring the ratio of uranium to lead in those crystals, geologists can calculate with astounding accuracy the day that ash fell, giving a firm no older than or no younger than date for the fossil trapped between the layers. It's how we can confidently say our bone is 70 million years old and not 60 or 80. Even with all this, a mystery often remains when the fossil is finally uncovered. You've probably seen it in a museum. A dinosaur skeleton, especially a predator, is often found in a dramatic death pose, with its head thrown back over its body and its tail arched upwards. For a long time, this was thought to be the result of agonizing death throes. But today, taphonomists, the forensic scientists of paleontology, still argue whether this pose is due to the animal's final moments or something more mundane. One theory is that it's the simple effect of water currents rolling the body into a stable position. Another, more popular idea is that as the strong ligaments of the neck and tail dried out after death, they contracted, just like a rubber band, pulling the spine into that dramatic arch. The pose might not be one of agony, but of simple post-mortem physics. That quiet physical process of ligaments contracting might be the final touch on the masterpiece. But even now, as a perfect stone replica locked deep within the earth, your bone is not safe. It has survived the biological and chemical gauntlet, but now it must face the geological one. The planet itself is a living, breathing machine, and its movements are unimaginably powerful and utterly indifferent to the treasures it holds. You are no longer on a static floodplain. You are on a tectonic plate, a colossal raft of rock floating on a sea of molten mantle. And that raft is moving, perhaps only an inch or two a year, the same speed your fingernails grow, but over millions of years, that movement adds up to thousands of miles. Your fossil's new home, the layer of sandstone that entombs it, is part of this continental drift. And this journey holds two primary dangers of total annihilation. The first is subduction. Imagine your plate collides with another denser oceanic plate. In this slow-motion crash, the oceanic plate is forced downwards, diving back into the Earth's fiery interior. It acts like a giant conveyor belt, pulling the overlying rock with it. If your fossil is on the losing side of this battle, it will be dragged down into the mantle, where temperatures exceed thousands of degrees. It will be unmade, melted back into the primordial magma from which all rocks are born. Its 70 million year story will end in a puff of vapor, its every trace erased forever. Even if it avoids that fiery fate, there is a second danger: metamorphism. As your bone gets buried deeper and deeper, the heat and pressure can become so intense that they cook the rock itself, changing its fundamental nature. Sandstone becomes quartzite, limestone becomes marble. This process stretches, squeezes, and recrystallizes everything. A fossil caught in this geological kiln is warped beyond recognition, its delicate features smeared into an unidentifiable streak, or completely obliterated as the rock's very chemistry is rewritten. To survive, your fossil must remain in a relatively stable, quiet part of the Earth's crust, avoiding the planet's most violent recycling programs. It is a mainstream historical fact that the mighty Himalayas were formed by this exact kind of tectonic violence, a continental collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates. Any fossils caught in the core of that collision were simply crushed to powder. But here is the great paradox. The very forces that can destroy the fossil are also the only ones that can bring it back to you. After tens of millions of years in the dark, the tectonic plates shift again. This time, instead of one diving under the other, they both buckle and push upwards. A great mountain range begins to rise, lifting the ancient floodplain sediments, including the sandstone layer holding your bone, thousands of feet into the air. This process of mountain building, or orogeny, is the fossil's elevator ride back to the surface. But this also starts the clock on its final and most perilous challenge: exposure. Now the forces of erosion, the same wind, rain, and ice that threatened the bone in its first days, return with a vengeance. For millennia, they relentlessly scour the mountains, stripping away the rock, layer by layer. A foot of rock is weathered away every few thousand years. The fossil is in a race. If the erosion is too slow, the fossil remains buried, and the mountains might wear down to nothing before it ever sees the light of day. If the erosion is too fast, the fossil will be exposed, but the very next winter's frost or the next spring's flood will shatter and wash away the newly freed stone before anyone can find it. The window of opportunity for discovery can be incredibly brief, perhaps only a few decades. Your bone has to emerge from its 70-million-year tomb at the exact right time in geological history, and even more improbably, at the exact right time in human history. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most unlikely hurdle of all, the human factor. You are now looking at a dusty, sun-baked badland in the middle of nowhere. A little piece of the hadrosaur femur is sticking out of a low bluff. Its journey is complete. It has survived scavengers, microbes, chemistry, and the crushing forces of the planet itself. It is here. But that means nothing if it is not found. You watch as a hiker passes by, their boots crunching on the gravel. They kick the exposed end of the fossil, thinking it's just another rock, and walk on, oblivious. The fossil has won every battle, only to lose the war in the final second because no one recognized it. Then another figure appears. This one walks slowly, their eyes scanning the ground, not the horizon. This is a paleontologist. They see what the hiker did not: the porous texture of fossilized bone, subtly different from the surrounding sandstone. They see a curve that is not random, but biological. They brush away the dust with a gentle hand, their heart beginning to race as the sheer scale of the bone is revealed. This is the moment. The 70-million-year-long message in a bottle has finally washed ashore and been read. When you consider this entire ridiculous chain of improbable events, the perfect death, the rapid burial, the gentle cooking, the tectonic elevator ride, the perfectly timed erosion, and the final lucky discovery, you realize that every single fossil in every museum is a staggering miracle. It's a quirky tidbit of scientific history that some of the most important fossil finds were made by amateurs, ranchers, and even children who just happened to look down at the right place at the right time, proving that luck is the final, essential ingredient. We have spent this time together understanding the rules of the game, seeing how a normal fossil wins the cosmic lottery. But we are not here tonight to talk about the miracles. We are here to talk about the impossible ones. The specimens that not only ran this cosmic gauntlet and won, but did so under circumstances so bizarre, so specific, that they preserve moments that should have been lost forever. These are the rarest of the rare. And the first one we will visit looks like something straight out of mythology. Your journey now takes you away from the abstract, deep time of geology and into a specific moment of human discovery. The year is 2006. You are in Liaoning province, in northeastern China. The landscape here is one of rolling hills and dusty quarries, where for decades, local farmers and paleontologists have been uncovering a treasure trove of unparalleled scientific worth. This is the Yixian Formation, a place that has, more than any other on Earth, revolutionized our understanding of the age of dinosaurs. It is a mainstream historical fact that this region is where the first definitive feathered dinosaurs were found, creatures like Sinosauropteryx, which proved beyond doubt the evolutionary link between dinosaurs and birds. The fossils here are not just bones, they are full-body impressions, complete with feathers, skin, and even the ghosts of internal organs, all thanks to the unique geology of ancient volcanic ash settling into deep, quiet lakes. It is a Cretaceous Pompeii. You are watching over the shoulder of a researcher as they work on a promising new layer of fine-grained shale. The rock here splits into thin, papery sheets. With a careful tap of a geological hammer along the edge of a likely-looking slab, a fissure appears. A thin chisel is inserted, and with a gentle twist, the slab cracks open like a book. The dust clears, and you see it. Sprawled across the newly revealed surface is the skeleton of a small, delicate creature. It's a dark impression against the light grey stone, a beautiful and not uncommon find in this area. It appears to be a juvenile, its bones exquisitely preserved, a testament to the quiet, anoxic lake bottom where it came to rest 125 million years ago. But as the researcher leans in closer, a slight frown of confusion appears. Something is not right. They begin to count the most obvious features. There is a single small torso, the faint outlines of 4 limbs, and a long, whip-like tail. It's all there. Then their eyes move to the other end of the animal. There is a skull, small and pointed, at the end of a gracefully curved, impossibly long neck. And right beside it is another skull, on another, equally long neck. The researcher pauses, their mind immediately cycling through the most likely explanations. The first, and by far the most probable, is that this is not one animal, but 2. It's a classic fossil illusion. One creature died and settled on the lake floor, and then, perhaps days or weeks later, another of the same species died and happened to land directly on top of it. The way they are positioned makes them look connected, a trick of taphonomy. It's a fossil sandwich. This initial hypothesis is born from scientific caution. The world of paleontology has a healthy dose of skepticism, built from years of experience with misleading fossils and even outright forgeries. There's a quirky and rather dark history of paleontologists being fooled. Early fossil hunters were sometimes tricked by clever composites, and this has led to a debate that always surfaces with strange finds. Upon the discovery of such an anomaly, paleontologists first debate its authenticity, questioning if it's a clever forgery designed to fool the fossil market before they even consider the biological implications. So, the initial assumption is that it's a coincidence, an overlapping burial. A nice find, certainly, but perhaps not a complete or perfect individual. The slab is carefully jacketed in plaster and burlap for its journey to the laboratory. Here, away from the dust and the harsh sun, the real investigation begins. You are now in a quiet room, the only sounds being the soft hum of ventilation and the gentle scrape of a steel needle on stone. A fossil preparator is hunched over a microscope, their eyes fixed on the specimen. Their job is to remove the surrounding rock, the matrix, grain by painstaking grain. It is a work of immense patience and surgical precision. They are focusing on the area where the two necks meet the body. Under high magnification, the fossil reveals its truth. The preparator starts with the neck on the right side. They follow the chain of tiny, intricate vertebrae down, one by one, like beads on a string. The final cervical vertebra of that neck articulates perfectly with the first thoracic vertebra of the torso. A clean, undeniable connection. Then, with a slow breath, they move the scope to the left neck. Once again, they trace the bony chain downwards. It curves gracefully, almost mirroring its twin. They follow it down, down, down to where it should, if this were two separate animals simply lie on top of the other's skeleton. But it doesn't. The final vertebra of the left neck also slots perfectly into the shared spinal column. There is no overlap. There is no subtle shift in the rock indicating a different burial layer. There is just a single vertebral column that, at one point, splits cleanly into two beautiful serpentine necks. The scientific evidence is irrefutable. The preparator leans back, and a slow wave of astonishment washes over them. It is one animal. It is a real two-headed creature from the early Cretaceous. Now that the impossible has been confirmed, the questions shift. What is this animal? It's not a dinosaur, though it lived alongside them. It is a species called Hyphalosaurus, the submerged lizard. It was a member of a now extinct group of semi-aquatic reptiles called Choristodores. As an adult, it would have reached about 1 meter in length, a sleek, efficient predator in the calm, deep lakes of the Yixian ecosystem. You can picture it alive, using its webbed feet for steering and its long, flattened tail for propulsion. It would glide silently through the murky water. Its most prominent feature was its incredibly long and flexible neck, which it would use like a striking snake, darting its head forward to snatch tiny fish and invertebrates with its mouth full of sharp, needle-like teeth. It was a creature perfectly adapted to its world, a successful and common animal in this ancient environment. And it is this context, this vision of a sleek and graceful swimmer, that makes the fossil before you all the more shocking. This was no mythological beast, but a real animal, born with a mutation so profound it seems like something from a dream. This two-headed marvel, now confirmed as a biological reality, has a name. The condition is called polycephaly, literally many heads, and while it may seem like the stuff of legend, it is a known, if exceptionally rare, natural phenomenon. It's not a monster from a mythological tale, but a story of developmental biology gone awry. To understand how this happens, you have to picture the very first moments of life in an egg on a cellular level. You know how identical twins are formed? A single fertilized egg begins to grow, And then, at an early stage, it splits completely in two, with each half developing into a separate, genetically identical individual. Now, imagine that process begins, but something interrupts it. An environmental trigger, a genetic misfire, a random fluctuation. The cause is often unknown. The embryo starts to split, a process called axial bifurcation, beginning at the head, or the axial, end of the body. The split proceeds downwards, starting to form two distinct spinal columns, two necks, two heads. But then it just stops. The signal to continue dividing fails, and the two developing bodies fuse back into one. The result is a single organism with a shared torso, shared limbs, but two separate heads and necks. It is a biological accident frozen in flesh, an echo of the twin it was never able to become. To truly grasp the implications of this, you need only look to our modern world. Polycephaly, while it can occur in almost any group of vertebrates, is noted by scientists as being far more common in modern reptiles, especially snakes and turtles. You've likely seen pictures of them, a strange and captivating sight. But the reality of their lives is anything but magical. You can watch a two-headed snake try to navigate its world and see the immense struggle. One head smells prey to the right, while the other sees a threatening shadow on the left. The shared body receives two contradictory commands at once. Go right, go left. The result is often paralysis, a confused, writhing creature unable to effectively move, hunt, or flee. It is a body quite literally at war with itself. Feeding becomes a life-or-death competition. Even if one head manages to catch a small mouse, the other head, driven by its own separate brain and instincts, might try to steal the meal from its twin's mouth. There are even documented cases of one head trying to eat and swallow the other. They are two separate consciousnesses trapped in a single shared vehicle, and they have no understanding of their unique predicament. This constant internal conflict means that polycephalic animals in the wild almost never survive. They are easily picked off by predators, they struggle to find enough food, and their uncoordinated movements make them vulnerable to accidents. They are a biological experiment that is almost always doomed to fail. And this brings us back to the tiny, delicate skeleton on the slab of Chinese shale. The scientific evidence preserved in the rock tells us a crucial part of this creature's story. The fossil is incredibly small, and its bones show clear signs of being underdeveloped. It is the skeleton of an embryo, or, at best, a freshly hatched neonate. This was not some great two-headed beast that swam the Cretaceous lakes. This was a baby that almost certainly died either within the egg or just moments after emerging into the water. Its two heads and uncoordinated limbs would have made it impossible to swim or hunt. Its life was likely measured in minutes or hours, a brief, confused struggle before it sank to the bottom of that quiet lake, where the fine volcanic ash would grant it the immortality that life had denied it. This phenomenon of conjoined development is not limited to reptiles. It's a deep and ancient part of the story of all vertebrates. In fact, the oldest known record of conjoined twins is a 10,000-year-old human burial found in Illinois, a poignant reminder that this is a journey our own species has also taken. But it's important not to confuse true polycephaly with a related and equally strange condition. As a quirky tidbit, you might have heard of Janus cats, kittens born with what appears to be two faces on a single head. This condition is called diprosopus, and it's not caused by incomplete twinning. Instead, it's the result of an overproduction of a protein called sonic hedgehog. Yes, that's its real name, which controls facial width. Too much of the protein, and the face essentially duplicates itself. It's a different biological pathway to a similarly startling result. The prevalence of true polycephaly in reptiles, both ancient and modern, raises a fascinating question for which there is no firm answer. Biologists still argue whether the higher incidence of polycephaly in reptiles is due to environmental and statistical factors, or a deeper genetic predisposition. One side of the debate points out that many reptiles, like turtles, lay large clutches of dozens of eggs. The more eggs you have, the higher the statistical probability that one of them will experience a random developmental error. Mammals, with their smaller litter sizes and internal wombs, offer a more controlled environment with fewer chances for mistakes. The other side suggests there might be something inherent to the diapsid lineage, the great family of reptiles and dinosaurs, that makes their embryonic development slightly more susceptible to this specific kind of incomplete split. Perhaps their genetic blueprint for twinning is just a little bit less robust. The truth is likely a combination of both, a mix of probability and predisposition that gave us this 1 in a billion fossil. To understand the brief, flickering life of this impossible creature, you have to understand the world it was born into. You must step back from the sterile lab and the quiet museum and immerse yourself in the environment that both created and entombed it. Let's travel back to that lake in the Liaoning province, 125 million years ago. You need to erase the popular image of a perpetually hot, steamy, tropical dinosaur world. The Jehol Biota, as this ecosystem is known, was different. You are standing at the edge of a vast, tranquil lake, surrounded by a dense, temperate forest. The air is cool and humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. In the distance, the dark, conical shapes of several active volcanoes smudge the horizon, a constant, silent reminder of the power simmering beneath the earth. The forest is a mix of the familiar and the alien. Towering ginkgo trees, their fan-shaped leaves fluttering in the breeze, stand alongside immense conifers and strange, palm-like cycads. It's a world of greens and browns, but if you look closely in the undergrowth, you can see the first tentative splashes of color. A mainstream historical fact about this period is that the very first flowering plants were just beginning their evolutionary journey, and the Jehol Biota provides some of the earliest, most delicate examples. This was a world with seasons. Paleontologists still debate the exact nature of the climate here, whether it was consistently temperate or if it experienced harsh, snowy winters, which would dramatically change our picture of how these feathered dinosaurs lived. For now, though, it is a mild spring day. The forest is alive with sound and movement. You hear the chirps and squawks of the world's first true birds. In the trees above, you see a flock of Confuciusornis, crow-sized avians with blackish feathers, and on the males, a pair of long, elegant, ribbon-like tail feathers. They chatter amongst themselves before taking to the air in a great, flapping swarm. Scurrying through the ferns on the forest floor, you spot a Sinosauropteryx. It's a small dinosaur, no bigger than a turkey, but it's covered in a thick coat of simple hair-like feathers, a kind of primitive dino fuzz. It moves with a quick, bird-like gait, its long, striped tail held out behind it for balance as it hunts for small lizards. Thanks to the incredible preservation here, this is not speculation. As a quirky and amazing tidbit, scientists have actually studied the fossilized pigment cells, or melanosomes, in the feathers of this dinosaur, allowing them to reconstruct its color pattern. A reddish-brown body, a light-colored belly, and that striking reddish and white striped tail. The past is not just black and white. As dusk begins to fall, you might see one of this ecosystem's strangest residents. A small, furry creature with wide, dark eyes emerges from a hollow in a tree. It scurries to the end of a high branch, and then, with a leap, it soars through the air. It's not a bird or a bat, but a gliding mammal called Volaticotherium. A wide membrane of furry skin, a patagium, stretches between its limbs, allowing it to glide for long distances, an ancient forerunner to the modern flying squirrel. This world is not just a land of giants. It's filled with these small, bizarre, and specialized creatures, all living in the shadow of the dinosaurs. Now, your gaze shifts to the lake itself, the home of your Hyphalosaurus. You slip beneath the surface of the cool, calm water. It's deep and a little murky, and sunlight filters down in hazy green shafts. The lake bottom is a soft, thick layer of fine silt, punctuated by the skeletal remains of fish and the occasional waterlogged tree branch. This is the environment your two-headed baby was born into. Had it been a healthy, normal hatchling, its life would have been focused on survival in this quiet, underwater world. Its prey is abundant. You see shoals of small, minnow-like fish called Lycoptera, their silvery scales flashing as they turn in unison. They are the primary food source for many of the lake's predators. The soft mud is also teeming with life. Tiny crustaceans and the larvae of ancient insects, perfect food for a baby reptile. But this tranquil world is not without its dangers. Large predatory fish lurk in the deeper, darker parts of the lake. And while an adult Hyphalosaurus would have been a fast and agile swimmer, a tiny, confused, two-headed baby would have been an easy target. The greatest threat, however, was the lake itself, and the volcanoes that fed it. Periodically, these volcanoes would belch out not just lava, but huge quantities of fine, lightweight ash. This ash would rain down on the landscape, blanketing the forest and, crucially, the surface of the lake. The fine ash would choke the water, killing fish and other aquatic life in massive numbers before settling on the bottom in a thick, suffocating layer. This is the secret to the Yixian Formation's incredible preservation. It is a dinosaur Pompeii. The scientific evidence lies in the rock itself. It's a type of clay called bentonite, which is formed from weathered volcanic ash. This ash, because it was so fine-grained, could perfectly capture the most delicate details. The individual barbs of a feather, the texture of skin, the tiny hollow bones of a bird. When an animal died and sank to the bottom of the lake, this ash would gently cover it, creating an impression as detailed as a photograph. The anoxic conditions of the deep water and the rapid burial by this inert, protective ash stopped the process of decay almost instantly. It is this combination of unique geological circumstances, deep, quiet lakes and constant, fine-grained volcanic ash falls, that turned this entire ecosystem into one of the world's most perfect fossil archives. It's the only reason a creature as fragile and ephemeral as a two-headed baby reptile could be preserved for you to see 125 million years later. That perfect archive of ash and stone presents a profound responsibility. The fossil is safe for 125 million years, but it is at its most vulnerable in the moments it is being freed. You are back in the preparation lab, a place that is part artist's studio, part operating theater. The slab of shale sits under the bright, focused light of a work lamp. The work of extracting this fossil is the exact opposite of the violent, frantic bone wars of the 19th century, a quirky and chaotic period where rival paleontologists would sometimes dynamite fossil sites in their rush to discover new species, often destroying as much as they recovered. Here, the only driving force is patience. You watch the preparators' steady hands. They are not using hammers or chisels. In their hand is a pin vise, holding a tungsten carbide needle sharpened to a microscopic point. With a surgeon's focus, they gently scrape away at the rock matrix, following the faint outline of a bone. A single grain of sand is a significant piece of territory. The work is guided by modern technology. Often, a fossil like this is put through a CT scanner before preparation even begins. This provides a 3D map of the skeleton, a piece of scientific evidence showing the preparator exactly where every hidden bone lies, preventing a catastrophic wrong move. For the most delicate areas, another tool is used. It's an air abrasive, which is essentially a miniature sand blaster. But instead of sand, it shoots a fine, controlled stream of powder, sometimes something as gentle as baking soda, that slowly erodes the softer rock matrix, leaving the harder fossil bone untouched. As each tiny, paper-thin bone is exposed, the preparator might use a fine brush to apply a consolidant, a special type of adhesive that soaks into the porous fossil and strengthens it, ensuring it doesn't crumble to dust. You watch for what seems like hours as a single hair-thin rib is slowly excavated from its stony tomb. It is a process that can take hundreds, even thousands of hours for a single small specimen. Once the fossil is fully prepared, the next phase of its journey begins, its introduction to the world. A team of scientists collaborates on a scientific paper. They take meticulous measurements, photograph the specimen from every angle, and create detailed anatomical drawings. They compare it to the dozens of normal Hyphalosaurus fossils that have been found. They write up their findings, carefully laying out the evidence that this is a single polycephalic individual. The language is dry, academic, and precise, a stark contrast to the almost mythical nature of the discovery itself. Then comes the trial by fire, peer review. This mainstream historical fact is a cornerstone of all modern science. The paper isn't just published, it's sent out to a small group of anonymous experts in the field. Their job is to be the ultimate critics. They poke holes in the arguments. They question the evidence. They demand more proof. You can imagine the reviewers receiving this paper, an eyebrow raised in skepticism. A two-headed fossil? Really? They would check every measurement, scrutinize every photo, ensuring it wasn't a clever fake or a simple misinterpretation. Only after surviving this intellectual gauntlet is the paper accepted for publication, in this case by the prestigious UK Royal Society. And then the news breaks. The story is picked up by science journalists and then the wider media. This is where the inevitable sensationalism begins. Headlines around the world proclaim the discovery of a two-headed dinosaur or a real-life monster. The careful academic language of the paper is translated into something much more dramatic. But within the paleontological community, the excitement is just as real, though more nuanced. It is the thrill of seeing something genuinely new, something that pushes the boundaries of what they thought was possible to find. Even after publication, the conversation continues. Scholars still debate the interpretation of such unique, one-off fossils, arguing whether a single anomalous specimen can be used to draw broader conclusions about the developmental biology of an entire group of extinct animals. And in the quiet at the center of this storm of scientific debate and media buzz lies the fossil itself, now resting in a museum drawer. It is time to step back and appreciate its true status. This is not just a rare fossil. It is the oldest undisputed example of polycephaly ever found in the fossil record. And more importantly, it is the only known fossil of a two-headed creature. From the entire 200 million year reign of the dinosaurs and their relatives, thousands of specimens of Hyphalosaurus have been pulled from the Yixian Formation, but only this one. It is a 1 in a billion anomaly, preserved by a 1 in a billion chance. But as you look at the tiny skeleton, another feeling begins to surface, something deeper than scientific curiosity. You see the two small skulls, the two delicate necks joined to one fragile body, and you realize you are not looking at a monster. You are looking at a casualty. This creature is the fossilized record of a biological accident. It is a life that never had a chance. It never got to grow into the sleek swimmer it was supposed to be. It never got to hunt in the murky water or bask on the shore of that Cretaceous lake. It likely only knew a few brief moments of confused, uncoordinated struggle. It was a failed experiment of nature, a life snuffed out before it could even begin. And yet, in the most profound of ironies, the very birth defect that made its life impossible is the sole reason for its immortality. It is only because it was so strange, and because it died so young in that perfect spot, that its story was saved. It is a sad and beautiful fossil, a poignant reminder that nature's mistakes can sometimes tell us more than its successes. That poignant image of a life unlived is the scientific reality of the fossil. But as you continue to gaze at it, your mind, untethered by the strict rules of academic interpretation, begins to wander. Your brain is wired for pattern recognition, for story. And the pattern you see here, a long-necked, two-headed reptilian body, is one that echoes through the deepest and oldest parts of human culture. You are not just looking at a biological anomaly, you are looking at the blueprint for a monster of myth. Across the globe, in cultures that had no possible contact with one another, our ancestors told stories of multi-headed serpentine beasts. Your mind travels first to the sun-baked shores of ancient Greece, to the swamps of Lerna. You picture the hero Heracles, his muscles straining as he confronts the Hydra. It is his second great labor, a mainstream historical fact of mythology. And his foe is a terrifying, multi-headed water serpent that is chaos and poison made manifest. For every head he severs, 2 more grow in its place. The creature is a symbol of a challenge that seems insurmountable, a problem that multiplies the more you fight it. The visual link to your fossil is undeniable. The reptilian form, the multiple heads, the association with a watery domain. Then your thoughts drift eastward to the lush landscapes of India and Southeast Asia. You see the Naga, powerful serpent deities that guard the water realms. They rise from the surface of a tranquil river, not with one head, but with a fan of 5 or 7 hooded cobra heads, their unblinking eyes filled with ancient wisdom. They are complex beings, sometimes benevolent bringers of rain and fortune, other times fearsome and destructive. A quirky tidbit you might find interesting is that even today, in many cultures, the chance discovery of a 2-headed snake is seen as a powerful omen, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill, showing how these real anomalies continue to feed our sense of wonder and dread. Finally, your mind journeys to the cold, vast forests of Slavic folklore. Here, the hero Dobrynya Nikitich draws his sword to face the Zmei Gorinich, a fearsome, dragon-like creature with 3 fire-breathing heads. The Zmei is the ultimate antagonist, a winged terror that embodies destruction. The Hydra, the Naga, the Zmei. 3 different cultures, 3 different stories, but one recurring, powerful image. Mythologists and historians still debate the euhemerist theory, which argues that all myths are ultimately exaggerations of real historical events or natural phenomena, versus the idea that they are purely symbolic representations of the human psyche. And this is where the little fossil in its museum drawer becomes so profound. It offers a piece of evidence for the euhemerist view. It is a real-world counterpart to these fantastical beasts. It proves that the fundamental laws of biology do, on very rare occasions, produce such creatures. It is not difficult to imagine one of our distant ancestors, thousands of years ago, stumbling upon a 2-headed snake sunning itself on a rock. In a world without the framework of modern science, what could they conclude? It would be a terrifying, unnatural sight. A creature that defies the rules of the world. It would be a god, a demon, a monster. That single, startling encounter could easily become the seed of a story, a legend told around a fire, growing and changing with each retelling until it becomes the mighty Hydra. The scientific evidence connecting these myths lies in shared ancestry. The diapsid group that includes our Hyphalosaurus also includes the snakes, lizards, and crocodiles that were the real-world basis for these legendary reptiles. Your little fossil is not a myth, but it might just be the 125-million-year-old ancestor of one. As you turn away from the fossil, you take with you a summary of its importance. It is a priceless window into the developmental biology of ancient life, confirming that the intricate dance of embryology and its occasional missteps has remained remarkably consistent across vast stretches of geological time. It is also the ultimate testament to the Jehol Biota, a perfect snapshot from a lost world, preserved with a fidelity that should be impossible. And above all, it is a powerful reminder that in science, the anomalies, the mistakes of nature, are often the most valuable discoveries of all. They show us the frayed edges of life's rulebook, and in doing so, reveal more about the rules themselves. The story of the 2-headed Hyphalosaurus is one of profound biological isolation. It is a story of a creature that, because of its defect, was alone in its struggle, its 2 heads and 1 body, a universe of internal conflict. It is a fossil of a life that never had a chance to connect with the world around it. But now, we will leave this singular tragedy behind. Our journey takes us to another time, another continent, and to a fossil that tells the opposite kind of story. It is not about a failed birth or biological solitude. It is a fossil that captures a moment of connection, an interaction so strange and so intimate that it, too, seems like it should be impossible. We are going to look at a story of 2 completely different species, a predator and another creature, finding shelter together in the most unlikely of circumstances. Your journey now requires a profound leap, not just in space, but in time. You leave the cool, temperate forests of the Cretaceous behind and plunge deep into the past, to a world that is almost unimaginably alien. The year is 252 million years ago. You are in the Karoo Basin of what will one day be South Africa, and you have arrived in the immediate aftermath of an apocalypse. This is the dawn of the Triassic period, and the world is a ghost of its former self. Life on Earth has just endured the Permian-Triassic extinction event, an almost unbelievable cataclysm that makes the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs look like a minor fender bender. It is a mainstream historical fact that this event, often called the Great Dying, was the most severe extinction the planet has ever known. It is estimated to have wiped out over 90% of all species in the oceans and 70% of vertebrate life on land. The prime suspect for this planetary murder is a series of volcanic eruptions on a scale that defies comprehension. In what is now Siberia, fissures in the Earth's crust opened up and bled lava for 2 million years, covering an area larger than Europe in a thick blanket of volcanic rock. The scientific evidence for this, the Siberian traps, is a stark reminder of our planet's capacity for self-destruction. This relentless eruption pumped catastrophic amounts of carbon dioxide and other toxins into the atmosphere, triggering runaway global warming, turning the oceans acidic and anoxic, and poisoning the very air. Scientists still debate the exact cocktail of kill mechanisms, arguing over the relative importance of ocean anoxia, hypercapnia, acid rain, or even a volcanic haze that blocked out the sun. But the result was a world scoured clean of most life. The world you are now standing in is the world of the survivors. It is a harsh and unforgiving landscape. There are no lush forests here. The complex ecosystems of the Permian, with their diverse fauna and flora, have vanished. The landscape is a vast, semi-arid floodplain, stretching to a hazy horizon under a sickly, yellowish sun. The earth is reddish-brown and deeply cracked from long periods of drought. The only vegetation consists of hardy, scraggly plants like ferns and seed ferns that can withstand the brutal conditions. A quirky and rather grim tidbit from this time is the discovery of a fungal spike in the geological record, a thin layer packed with fossilized fungal spores, suggesting that, for a time, the world's plant life had died off so completely that the planet was little more than a giant, rotting compost heap. The climate here is one of violent extremes. For months on end, a blistering sun beats down, baking the landscape and evaporating what little water there is. The rivers are mostly just wide, sandy channels, ghosts of the water they once carried. Then the seasons shift, and the drought is broken by sudden torrential downpours that turn the dry riverbeds into raging, muddy torrents. Life here is not about thriving. It is about enduring. Every creature you see is a descendant of a very lucky, or very tough, ancestor. And it is in this desperate, damaged world that our two main characters are trying to make a living. The first is a creature named Thrinaxodon. It is about the size of a fox, and at first glance you might mistake it for a lizard. But look closer. Its legs are not sprawled out to the side like a crocodile's. They are positioned more directly underneath its body, allowing for a more efficient, mammal-like gait. Its teeth are not simple, uniform pegs. They are differentiated, with sharp incisors at the front, long canines for stabbing, and complex molars in the back for chewing. This is a cynodont, a mammal-like reptile, and it is on the direct evolutionary line that will, over the next 100 million years, lead to you. It was almost certainly warm-blooded, and the tiny pits in its snout bones suggest it had something very unreptilian, whiskers, to help it navigate in the dark. Thrinaxodon is a survivor. It's a nimble, intelligent carnivore, and it has a crucial adaptation for this harsh world. It digs burrows deep into the earth to escape the brutal heat of the day and the chill of the night. Then you see our second character. This is Broomistega. It is everything Thrinaxodon is not. It is a large, heavily built amphibian, a temnospondyle, with a body like a squat, muscular salamander and a head that is bizarrely wide, flat, and almost perfectly circular. Its powerful legs sprawl out from its body, and it moves with a slow, lumbering waddle. It is a relic, a holdover from the swampy, wet world of the Permian. Its lifestyle is tied to the water that is now so scarce in this Triassic landscape. When the rivers dry up, it is exposed and vulnerable. It is a creature out of its time, a representative of an old dynasty that is slowly fading away, struggling to find its place in this hostile new world. So here are our players, two creatures that could not be more different. One is a forward-looking, warm-blooded proto-mammal, an active burrower adapted for the future. The other is a backward-looking, cold-blooded amphibian, a relic of the past, chained to a dying way of life. They are predator and potential prey, mammal cousin and amphibian. Under normal circumstances, their only interaction would be a brief, violent one, in which the Thrinaxodon tries to make a meal of the Broomistega. They have no reason to associate, no reason to cooperate, no reason to share a space. And yet, deep within this harsh Triassic Earth, a fossil is waiting to be found that shows them doing just that. That question, why these two utterly different creatures would ever be found together, hung in the air for 252 million years, a silent secret locked in stone. Your journey now fast forwards to our time, to the moment the key to that lock was found. The year is 2013. A team of paleontologists is working under the relentless sun of the South African Karoo. The rocks around them are a pale, reddish-brown, the fossilized soil of that ancient, post-apocalyptic floodplain. They are prospecting, their eyes scanning for the telltale shape and texture of fossilized bone weathering out of the soft mudstone. One of them spots something unusual. It is not a bone, but a distinct cylindrical shape in the rock, its texture harder and a different color from the surrounding matrix. It's a fossilized burrow, a cast of the hollow space an animal had dug for itself, all those millions of years ago. You have to understand that finding a trace fossil like this is, in itself, a fantastic discovery. A burrow is a direct record of an animal's behavior. It tells you that the creature was seeking shelter, that it had the physical ability to dig, and that it was interacting with its environment in a complex way. This stony tube is a ghost of a home. With great care, the team excavates the entire block containing the burrow cast. It's a heavy, precious piece of the ancient world. Back in the laboratory, the slow work of preparation begins. As they carefully chip away at the cast, bones begin to appear inside. This isn't a surprise, it's what they were hoping for. An animal had died in its own shelter. As the skeleton is further revealed, they identify it. The differentiated teeth, the position of the limbs, the size. It is, without a doubt, a Thrinaxodon. This discovery makes perfect sense. It's a neat and tidy story. Thrinaxodon was a known burrower, and here one is, perfectly preserved inside its home. It is a wonderful, complete specimen that confirms everything they already knew. The fossil is given a museum number, entered into the vast catalogue of finds from the Karoo, and placed on a tall metal shelf in a climate-controlled collection room, surrounded by thousands of other bones. And there, for a time, its story ends. It is another data point, a valuable but seemingly straightforward piece of the puzzle. But years pass. technology evolves. The way we look at fossils changes. The days of paleontology being just about finding big, obvious bones, like the first megalosaurus jaw fragment described in England in the 1820s, are long gone. A researcher, perhaps working on a larger project to understand the structure of these Triassic burrows, decides to take a closer look at the specimen. But instead of chipping away more of the precious and finite rock, they turn to a new tool. The entire burrow cast is placed inside a high-resolution CT scanner. You can imagine the scene. The quiet hum of the machine as it bombards the rock with X-rays from every conceivable angle, creating thousands of digital cross-sections. This is the key piece of scientific evidence. The CT scanner is a non-destructive eye, allowing you to see through solid stone and map out every subtle change in density. You are watching the computer screen as the data is processed. A ghostly three-dimensional image of the burrow begins to appear. You can see the familiar curled-up skeleton of the Thrinaxodon, its spine curved as if it were sleeping. The image is rotated, zoomed in on. The operator is checking the quality of the scan when they notice something. There are other shapes in the rock, other areas of high density that look like bone, but they don't seem to belong to the Thrinaxodon skeleton. They are intertwined with it, pressed right up against it. At first, you might assume they are just displaced pieces of the same animal, broken before burial. But the software allows you to digitally remove the Thrinaxodon skeleton from the image. As its bones fade from the screen, the other shapes remain. And now, it is clear. It is a second skeleton. A complete, articulated second skeleton. A wave of shock ripples through the quiet lab. There were two animals in that burrow. The operator zooms in on the skull of this second creature. It is not the narrow, mammal-like skull of another Thrinaxodon. This skull is wide, brutally flat, and almost circular. It is unmistakable. It is the head of a Broomistega. The slow, lumbering, water-loving amphibian was in the burrow too, nestled tightly against the warm-blooded proto-mammal. The discovery is baffling. It upends the simple, tidy story of a single animal dying in its home. The question that hangs in the air is now deafening. What on earth was it doing there? This find is so unusual it borders on the surreal. Paleontologists dream of finding uber-rare fossils like a scrap of skin or the impression of an eyeball. But to find two different species, a predator and another large vertebrate, curled up together in a single burrow is something else entirely. It's a scene that has no immediate, logical explanation. There's a long-standing debate among paleontologists. Curators still argue over the ethics and efficacy of fully preparing a fossil versus leaving it in its matrix, as preparation can destroy contextual clues. In this case, by leaving the fossil in its stony matrix and using the non-destructive power of the CT scanner, the team preserved a secret that would have otherwise been lost, a secret that now demands an answer. That question, born from the silent glow of a computer screen, demands an answer. Your mind, like the minds of the paleontologists who made the discovery, immediately begins to cycle through the possibilities, starting with the most obvious and the most violent. The law of the Triassic, like the law of any wild place, was hunt or be hunted. So, the first and simplest hypothesis is one of predation. You must picture the scene. The lumbering Broomistega, perhaps wandering weak and exposed under the hot sun, is spotted by the quicker, more cunning Thrinaxodon. The Cynodont attacks, and after a brief struggle, subdues the larger amphibian. It then drags its hard-won prize back to the safety of its underground den, where it can consume the meal in peace, away from the prying eyes of other scavengers. It's a clean, simple, and brutal explanation. It makes perfect sense. And it is completely wrong. This is where the high-tech eye of the CT scanner becomes a forensic tool. You are now a detective, examining the evidence of a 252-million-year-old cold case. The first thing you look for are the telltale signs of a predator's attack. You scan the digital bones of the Broomistega, zooming in, rotating the skeleton, looking for puncture marks that would match the sharp canine teeth of the Thrinaxodon. There are none. You look for fractures, shattered ribs, or a crushed skull. There is nothing. You look for scrape marks on the bone surface, the kind a predator's teeth make as it strips meat from a carcass. The bones are clean. The entire skeleton of the amphibian is pristine and, crucially, fully articulated. Its bones are all in their correct life positions, meaning it was not torn apart or violently ripped to shreds. The scene lacks any of the expected carnage. Furthermore, you examine the skeleton of the Thrinaxodon itself. A fight, even with a slow amphibian, carries risks. You look for a chipped tooth, a broken claw, any sign of a struggle. Again, nothing. The burrow itself shows no evidence of a violent encounter. The walls are smooth, the space is small. A life-or-death battle would have left its mark. The scientific evidence from this digital autopsy is clear. This was not a predator and its prey. This conclusion is bolstered when you consider the animals themselves. While Thrinaxodon was a carnivore, paleoecologists are still debating its exact role. They still argue about the prevalence of opportunistic scavenging versus active predation in many of these early cynodonts. Was it a mighty hunter, or more of a Triassic raccoon eating whatever it could find? Either way, a full-grown Broomistega would have been a challenging meal. Its huge, flat head was a solid shield of bone. It was heavy and powerful. For the fox-sized Thrinaxodon, attacking it would have been a high-risk, low-reward proposition, like trying to eat a paving stone. It simply doesn't add up. So you discard the predation hypothesis and move to the next logical, non-violent explanation. This is the coincidence hypothesis. Perhaps the Thrinaxodon died first, curled up in its burrow from disease, thirst, or old age. Then, sometime later, days, weeks, who knows, the Broomistega, wandering the harsh landscape in search of a cool, damp place to rest, stumbled upon this empty, pre-dug shelter. It seemed perfect. The amphibian crawled inside, settled down next to the decaying corpse of the burrow's former owner, and then it too expired. 2 separate deaths, linked only by a shared, convenient location. This story is less dramatic, but it seems perfectly plausible. Animals use abandoned shelters all the time. But once again, the intimate, detailed evidence of the fossil positioning tells you this isn't right. You call up the 3D model on the screen again, but this time you don't look at the individual bones. You look at the pose. You look at their relationship to each other in that small, dark space. They are not merely cohabiting the burrow. They are not lying on opposite sides. They are pressed together, their bodies following the same gentle curve. The head of the amphibian is resting near the flank of the cynodont. Their limbs are intertwined. If the Broomistega had entered the burrow after the Thrinaxodon had already died and started to decay, it is almost impossible that they would have ended up in this serene, carefully arranged posture. The scene does not look like 2 separate, coincidental events. It looks like a single, shared moment of repose. The word that comes to mind, as unscientific as it may seem, is cuddling. This forensic approach to fossils is a relatively new part of paleontology, but it helps solve puzzles that bones alone cannot. We can look at mainstream historical fossil sites like the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah, where dozens of skeletons of the predator Allosaurus are found jumbled together. For years, scientists thought it was a predator trap, where the carnivores got stuck in thick mud while trying to scavenge a carcass. You can see the evidence of their struggle in the scattered, disarticulated bones. That is what a violent or accidental mass death site looks like. Our burrow is the opposite. It is calm, ordered, and peaceful. Even the quirky world of trace fossils, with its fossilized vomit, or regurgitolites that can prove what a predator ate, offers no help here. All the evidence points away from violence and away from coincidence, leaving you with an even deeper mystery than before. If it wasn't a fight, and it wasn't an accident, what is the story of this impossible pair? The answer to the mystery, the key that unlocks the story of this impossible pairing, was there all along, hidden in the digital ghosts of the bones. To find it, you have to go back to the CT scans, back to your role as a forensic detective. You have already ruled out the Thrinaxodon as the attacker. But now you must ask a different question. Was the Broomistega attacked by anything? You begin a new, meticulous examination of the amphibian skeleton, this time looking for any sign of pathology, any injury at all, regardless of the source. And then you find it. On the right side of the creature's ribcage, several ribs show the distinct lumpy texture of healed bone. They are calluses, the same kind your own bones would form after a fracture. This is the unmistakable scientific evidence of a severe but non-fatal injury. The Broomistega had been crushed or stomped on, its ribs broken, and it had survived long enough for the healing process to begin. But that's not all. You zoom in on its wide, flat skull. There, on the thick plate of bone, are two small, circular puncture marks. You measure their size and spacing. They are far too large and set too far apart to be the teeth of the little Thrinaxodon. They are the signature of a much larger predator. The story suddenly snaps into focus. The Broomistega was not a trespasser looking for a convenient den. It was a victim, seeking refuge. With this crucial clue, a new and compelling narrative unfolds. You can see it now. Picture the wounded amphibian, its side aching with the pain of broken ribs, dragging itself across that desolate Triassic landscape. It had already survived one attack, but it is now slow, weak, and incredibly vulnerable. The relentless sun is beating down, sapping its energy, drying out its amphibian skin. It is desperate for two things: water and shelter. A place to hide from the sun, and a place to hide from the predator that had already tried to kill it once. In its desperate search, it stumbles upon a small, dark opening in the side of a dried riverbank, the entrance to the Thrinaxodon's burrow. It can likely smell the occupant within, and its instincts should be screaming at it to stay away. But pain and exhaustion can make animals do strange things. The cool, dark air wafting from the entrance promises relief. It is a gamble, but it is the only chance it has. And so, with its last reserves of strength, the lumbering, wounded creature squeezes itself inside. This brings us to the central question. What was the Thrinaxodon's reaction to this home invasion? Why did it not attack and kill the intruder? The answer most likely lies in a remarkable survival strategy known as aestivation. You are probably familiar with hibernation, the deep sleep that animals like bears use to survive the cold and scarcity of winter. Aestivation is the mirror image of this. It is a state of prolonged torpor, or suspended animation, that animals use to survive periods of intense heat and drought. The creature's metabolism slows to a crawl, its heart rate and breathing become almost imperceptible, and its body temperature drops to match its surroundings. It is a way of shutting down, of waiting out the hard times. This is not just a theory. You can see it happening today. The modern African lungfish provides a perfect mainstream example. When its riverbed home dries up and turns to baked mud, the lungfish burrows down, secretes a cocoon of mucus around its body, and enters a state of aestivation. It can remain in this state, barely alive, for months or even years, until the rains finally return and free it from its tomb. The Broomistega itself is a type of Lazarus taxon, a quirky term for a creature from a lineage thought to be fading, yet still clinging to life, much like the famous coelacanth. It was an ancient creature in a new world. It is very likely that our Thrinaxodon, deep within its cool, insulated burrow, was doing the same thing. It was sleeping through the hottest, driest part of the Triassic season. And this is what the injured Broomistega found when it crawled inside. Not an active, aggressive predator, but a dormant, unresponsive roommate. And this is where the story has its final, tantalizing touch of mystery. Paleontologists still argue whether the Thrinaxodon was in a deep state of aestivation and simply didn't notice its guest, or if it was awake and, for reasons unknown, tolerated the intrusion. In the first scenario, the cynodont is in such a deep torpor that it is essentially unconscious. It is little more than a warm, breathing rock. The wounded amphibian, seeking comfort and safety, simply curled up against its inert body and settled in. The Thrinaxodon was never even aware of its presence. This is the simplest and perhaps most likely explanation. But there is another, more poignant possibility. Perhaps the cynodont was in a lighter state of rest, aware of the intruder, but too lethargic from the heat to do anything about it. Perhaps it sensed that the bleeding, slow-moving amphibian posed no threat, and in the shared misery of that brutal Triassic drought, it simply allowed its fellow survivor to share its shelter. We will never know for sure, but in that dark, quiet burrow, two of the world's unlikeliest refugees found a moment of shared peace. And so, in that small, dark space, deep beneath the hostile Triassic sun, an unlikely truce exists. Regardless of whether the Thrinaxodon is in a deep, oblivious torpor or a state of quiet, lethargic tolerance, the outcome is the same. The wounded Broomistega has found its sanctuary. You can imagine the scene. The slow, almost imperceptible rise and fall of the cynodont's furry chest, its body a source of warmth in the cool earth. Beside it, the injured amphibian rests, its own metabolism slowed, its frantic search for safety finally over. For this one brief moment in the history of life, the rules are suspended. Predator and prey, mammal cousin and ancient amphibian, future and past. They are just two living things sharing a shelter from a world that is hostile to them both. Outside, the brutal drought continues. The sun beats down on the cracked, reddish earth. But far away, in the distant highlands that are the source of this region's ephemeral rivers, the weather is turning. Dark clouds gather, and a storm of immense proportions breaks. The rain falls not as a gentle shower, but as a deluge, a solid sheet of water that the baked, impermeable ground cannot absorb. The water begins to run, forming small rivulets, then streams, then a raging torrent, all funneling into the deep, dry channels of the ancient riverbeds. You are back in the burrow, in the quiet dark. The first sign of the disaster would have been a sound, a low-frequency vibration felt through the earth. A deep, distant rumble that slowly grows in intensity until it becomes a deafening roar. It is the sound of a flash flood, a wall of churning, muddy water moving down the dry river system with the speed of a freight train. The sheer power of such events is hard to comprehend, but we see modern analogues. The mainstream historical fact of the channeled scablands in Washington state gives us a sense of the scale. There, at the end of the last ice age, a bursting ice dam unleashed the Missoula floods, a cataclysmic event that scoured the landscape down to bare basalt bedrock. Our Triassic flood is smaller, but for the creatures in its path, it is just as absolute. The churning wall of water, thick with suspended sand, silt, and debris, slams into the riverbank where the burrow is located. The entrance, which had been a gateway to safety, is now the mouth of a trap. A torrent of cold, gritty water pours into the small chamber. The shock of the cold water and the sudden noise would have instantly jolted the Thrinaxodon from its slumber, but there would have been no time to react. The slow-moving, injured Broomistega would have stood no chance at all. This is the event that both killed them and immortalized them. The burrow did not just fill with clear water, it was inundated with the thick, sedimentary slurry of the flood. This is the key scientific evidence for their fate. The rock that filled the burrow, the cast the paleontologists found, is made of fine-grained, water-lane sandstone and siltstone. The slurry poured in, filling every last inch of the chamber, pressing their bodies together in that final, gentle pose. It was not a violent death in the sense of a struggle. It was a swift, silent, and complete burial. They died together, drowning in the dark, not as enemies, but as two victims of the same unpredictable, violent world they had sought refuge from. The natural disaster that ended their lives was also the perfect first step in their fossilization, entombing them instantly, protecting them from any potential scavengers, and setting the stage for their 252 million-year journey through time. The fossil record, on very rare occasions, grants us these frozen moments. The most famous quirky tidbit of this kind is the celebrated fighting dinosaurs fossil from Mongolia. It is a breathtaking fossil that shows a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in mortal combat. The raptor's sickle claw is embedded in the herbivore's neck, and the protoceratops has clamped its powerful beak down on the raptor's arm. They were buried together in a collapsing sand dune in the very instant of their deadly struggle. But as incredible as that fossil is, it is a story of violence. Other frozen moments show predation, a fish fossilized in the act of swallowing another. These are fossils of conflict. The fossil from the Karoo burrow is different. It is unique because it is a snapshot not of violence, but of peace. It is a moment of quiet cohabitation, of serene stillness. And in some ways, that is even rarer and more profound. The discovery of such fossils fuels a long-standing debate. Geologists and paleontologists still argue about the frequency and role of these catastrophic events in shaping the fossil record. Was most fossilization a slow, gradual process, or do our records disproportionately represent victims of sudden disasters? The very existence of this peaceful, shared tomb is a powerful piece of evidence for the idea that sometimes the most incredible stories are preserved only by the most sudden and tragic of endings. That tragic, sudden ending sealed a moment in time that the fossil record was never meant to preserve. You must understand how profoundly rare this snapshot is. The vast, overwhelming majority of fossils are just hard parts. A bone, a tooth, a shell, isolated from the context of the creature's life. They tell you what the animal was, its size and shape, but almost nothing about how it was. We are left to infer its behavior from its anatomy. We see sharp teeth and assume it was a predator. We see long legs and assume it was a runner. But these are just educated guesses, shadows of a life. Trace fossils, like the burrow itself, get us one step closer. They are direct evidence of behavior, of digging, walking, nesting. But they are still just ghosts. They are the footprint without the foot, the nest without the parent and its young. The fossil from the Karoo is the rarest of all combinations. It is the trace fossil of a home that still contains the bodies of its inhabitants, captured in a moment of non-violent interspecies interaction. Predation is easy to imagine being preserved. A predator dies with its prey's bones in its stomach. A fight is easy to imagine. The combatants die locked together. But to preserve a moment of quiet, peaceful cohabitation is statistically absurd. The chain of events has to be perfect. The unlikely meeting, the shared rest, and the sudden, simultaneous burial. And this leads you to the most profound and unanswerable question of all. As you look at the 3D model of the two creatures curled together, you have to wonder about the nature of that moment. Was it just a lucky coincidence of torpor and desperation? Or are you seeing something more? Scientifically, the most you could argue for is a case of primitive commensalism, a relationship where one party benefits, the injured Broomistega gets shelter, and the other is neither helped nor harmed. It is a plausible, if sterile, ecological explanation. But the image invites you to speculate further, to the very edge of what science can support. You find yourself wondering, is it possible you are looking at a flicker of something more? A moment of recognition? Of tolerance born from shared hardship? It is, of course, a scientific taboo to anthropomorphize, to project human emotions onto ancient animals. And yet, the scene is so powerfully resonant. We, as social creatures, are wired to see the story of the wounded seeking shelter and the powerful granting it. We can never know what was in the mind of that Thrinaxodon, but the fossil confronts us with the possibility that compassion, or at least a passive tolerance of another's suffering, is not a recent invention. It might be a deep and ancient current that has run through life for a very, very long time. This idea is not as outlandish as it might have once seemed. For decades, our reconstructions of the prehistoric world, our paleo art, depicted a world of constant savage violence. Dinosaurs were always shown locked in bloody combat. But a mainstream historical fact that began to change this perception was the discovery of the dinosaur Maiasaura, the good mother lizard, in the 1970s. The discovery of vast nesting grounds with eggs, hatchlings, and adults all together proved that these giant creatures engaged in complex maternal care, tending to their young in colonial nests. This was a revolution, showing a softer, more complex side to dinosaur life. Our burrow fossil adds another, stranger chapter to this story of complex ancient behavior. Of course, ethologists and paleontologists still argue fiercely about the extent to which we can infer complex social behaviors in extinct animals. Is a collection of skeletons evidence of a social herd, or just a random group that died in the same flood? The evidence is always open to interpretation, but what this fossil truly represents is a powerful story of survival in a broken, post-apocalyptic world. In the desperate aftermath of the Great Dying, life was clinging on by a thread. The old rules were gone, and the survivors had to be adaptable. This small scene, preserved in a burrow, shows us that in the most difficult of times, the most unexpected bonds can form, and life can find a way forward in ways we could never have predicted. The scientific evidence for this story, the lack of trauma, the peaceful pose, is a quiet but compelling argument for a moment of peace in a violent world. The image of these two different species finding a shared fate is a profound one. It is a story of a connection between two distant branches on the tree of life. And now, we must leave this quiet tomb behind. Our journey is about to take a turn to a fossil that explores this very same theme of unexpected connection, but in a way that is infinitely more personal, more shocking, and more relevant to you. We are moving from a relationship between a proto-mammal and an amphibian to a relationship within our own, very recent family. We are going to a cold Siberian cave to look at a tiny fragment of bone, a fossil that provided the first and only direct evidence of an intimate connection we knew was possible from our DNA, but had never, ever seen. You are leaving the deep, alien past behind. The immense 252 million year gap between you and the creatures in the burrow shrinks dramatically. Your destination is now much closer to home, both in time and in kinship. The year is approximately 90,000 years ago. You are standing in the foothills of the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia. This is the Pleistocene epoch, the heart of the Ice Age. But it is not a world of endless, sterile ice. You are on the Mammoth Steppe, a vast, cold and dry grassland that once stretched from Spain to Canada. The air is thin and crisply cold, and the wind whips across a sea of hardy grasses and low shrubs. In the distance you see them, the great megafauna of this lost world, a herd of immense woolly mammoths, their long curved tusks sweeping the ground as they graze. A shaggy-haired woolly rhinoceros, its head low, looking like a creature from a fantasy novel. This is a world of giants, a world of immense danger and immense opportunity for the creatures who are smart enough and tough enough to survive here. Your attention is drawn to a limestone cliff face cut by the fast-flowing Anui River. And there, nestled into the cliff, is the dark, arched entrance to a cave. This is Denisova Cave, and you must not think of it as a dark, damp, scary place. For the inhabitants of this landscape, this cave was prime real estate. It was a perfect multi-room shelter, naturally insulated from the howling winter winds and the summer heat. Its entrance, high above the river, provided a commanding view of the valley below, an ideal vantage point to spot migrating herds of prey or the approach of rival predators, like the formidable cave lion. For hundreds of thousands of years, this cave has been a home. Its floor is not bare rock, but a thick, compacted layer cake of earth, ash, and ancient debris, more than 20 feet deep. Each layer is a chapter in a vast and ancient story, a record of the generations who lived, loved, worked, and died within these walls. The science of stratigraphy, the careful excavation of these layers one by one, is how archaeologists read this book of time. And who were the authors of this book? Who were the people huddled around the fire in the cave's main chamber? Until very recently, we thought we had a fairly simple picture of the human family at this time. It was a story with two main characters. First, there were the Neanderthals, the first extinct human species ever discovered, a mainstream historical fact. Their remains were identified in Germany's Neander Valley in 1856. They have long been victims of a bad reputation. We picture them as stooped, grunting, club-wielding brutes. This image is almost entirely wrong. You see one now, a member of a small family group returning from a hunt. They are shorter and far more powerfully built than you are. Their stocky chests and short limbs, a biological adaptation for conserving heat in this cold climate. Their faces are different, with a long, low skull, a prominent brow ridge, and a large, projecting nose, likely to warm and humidify the frigid air. But the most important feature is the one you cannot see. Their brain was, on average, slightly larger than your own. They were not stupid. They crafted sophisticated and efficient stone tools from the Mysterian toolkit. They were expert hunters of giant game. They controlled fire, and they almost certainly had language. They cared for their sick and elderly, and they buried their dead. They were a successful, intelligent, and adaptable human species that dominated Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. The second character in this story is us, Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans. At this point in history, we are the newcomers on this stage. Having evolved in Africa, we have begun to spread out across the globe. You see us in this landscape too. We are taller, more slenderly built than the Neanderthals. Our bodies adapted for the warmer climates where we originated. We have different tools, and perhaps different ways of thinking, more reliant on complex symbolism and long-distance trade networks. For a long time, the story of this era was written as a simple drama. We showed up, and for reasons still hotly debated, the Neanderthals vanished. Anthropologists still argue about the reasons for the Neanderthals' extinction. Was it direct conflict, competition for resources, climate change, or were they simply absorbed by a much larger incoming population of modern humans? It was a two-person play, but we now know the world was far more crowded and complex. As a quirky tidbit, we know that at this same time, on the Indonesian island of Flores, a tiny 3-foot-tall species of human, nicknamed the Hobbit, was still alive. The human family tree was not a straight line, but a dense, branching bush. And Denisova Cave, this quiet home in the Siberian mountains, held the secret of another, completely unknown branch of that bush. A third major player in the human story, whose existence we never suspected until we began to analyze the tiniest scraps of bone left behind in the dirt. This unknown branch of the human family remained a ghost for a very long time, its existence completely unsuspected. The clue that would finally reveal it was not a massive skull or a telling jawbone. It was, in fact, almost nothing at all. Your journey takes you into Denisova Cave in the summer of 2008. You are with a team of Russian archaeologists working meticulously in the cool, earthy-smelling darkness. They are excavating a layer of sediment dated to between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago. The work is slow and painstaking. Every bucket of dirt is carefully sifted through fine mesh screens, a process designed to catch the tiniest artifacts. A stone flake from a tool, a bead, the tooth of a small rodent, During this process, a tiny object is recovered. It is a fragment of bone, so small you could hide it under your fingernail. It is dark, dense, and utterly unremarkable. Based on its shape, it appears to be the distal phalanx of the 5th digit. In plain English, the very tip of a little finger bone. But whose finger was it? A bear's? A cave lion's? A human's? It is far too small and incomplete to say for sure. In an earlier era of paleontology, a find like this would have been catalogued as osteological debris, a fancy term for unidentifiable bone scrap, and forgotten. It was a fossil that was, anatomically speaking, useless. But this is the 21st century, and a revolution has been quietly taking place in the study of the deep past. For over 150 years, our knowledge of extinct humans came from the shape of their bones. Now, scientists were learning to read a much more ancient and detailed text, the genetic code hidden within the bones themselves. The field of ancient DNA, or a DNA, was like a time machine. But it was an incredibly difficult technology to master. DNA is a fragile, complex molecule. The moment an organism dies, its DNA begins to break down, chopped into smaller and smaller pieces by water and natural radiation. What's worse, it is easily contaminated. The DNA of soil bacteria, of the person who excavates the bone, of the researcher in the lab, all of it can swamp the tiny, degraded fragments of the original code. To overcome these challenges, a special kind of laboratory was needed. You journey now to Leipzig, Germany, to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. Here, a team led by the geneticist Svante Pääbo was pioneering the techniques to read the book of ancient life. A mainstream historical fact of modern science is that this very lab produced the first complete sequence of the Neanderthal genome, a monumental achievement published in 2010. To do this, they work in ultra-sterile clean rooms, places cleaner than a hospital operating theater. Researchers wear full-body suits with hoods and face masks, looking more like astronauts than biologists, to prevent even a single flake of their own skin from contaminating a billion-dollar experiment. The tiny, seemingly useless finger bone from Denisova is sent here. You can imagine it arriving, a small, anonymous fragment in a plastic bag. In the clean room, a researcher takes what looks like a dentist's drill and carefully bores a tiny hole into the bone's core, extracting just a few milligrams of bone powder. This precious dust is then put through a complex chemical bath to dissolve the bone mineral and isolate any surviving fragments of DNA. They start with the easiest target, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Your cells have two types of DNA. Most of it, the nuclear DNA, is in the cell's nucleus and contains your main genetic blueprint. But your mitochondria, the tiny powerhouses of your cells, have their own small loop of DNA. Because each cell has hundreds of mitochondria, there are far more copies of mtDNA, making it much easier to find and piece together from ancient samples. The sequencing machines go to work, reading the chemical letters of the recovered fragments. And then, the result comes back. It is a complete mitochondrial DNA sequence. The team in Leipzig has a database containing mitochondrial DNA from thousands of modern humans from across the globe. And now, they also have the complete mitochondrial DNA sequence for several Neanderthals. The first comparison is made. Is the finger bone from a modern human? The computer flashes its answer. No. The sequence is vastly different. Okay. Is it a Neanderthal? Again, the computer returns its answer. No. This is the moment a shiver runs through the lab. The Neanderthal mtDNA sequence differs from a modern human's in, on average, 202 chemical positions, or base pairs. The sequence from the Denisova finger bone differed from modern humans by a staggering 385 base pairs. The scientific evidence was unambiguous. This was not a modern human. This was not a Neanderthal. This was something else entirely. Something new. When they placed it on the human family tree, it branched off long before the split between Neanderthals and us. Its lineage was far more ancient. From a piece of bone no bigger than a pea, a ghost had just walked out of the past and introduced itself. They had discovered a third kind of human, a previously unknown population that had lived in Asia for tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. They had no skull, no skeleton, just this tiny piece of a finger. They gave the ghost a name, taken from the cave where it was found. They called them the Denisovans. This discovery has ignited a debate that continues to this day. Geneticists and anthropologists still argue whether the Denisovans should be classified as a distinct species, Homo denisova, or as an archaic subspecies of Homo sapiens. The very definition of species begins to break down when you look this closely at our own tangled family history. And the finger bone was only the beginning. It had another, even more shocking, secret to reveal. The discovery of a ghost in the human family tree, revealed by the maternal line of mitochondrial DNA, was a scientific bombshell. But it was also an incomplete story. Reading mtDNA is like reading a single chapter from a vast family history, a chapter that only follows the mother's line back through time. The full, unabridged story of a person, with contributions from both parents and every ancestor, is written in the nuclear day, the 3 billion letters of the genome that reside in the nucleus of every cell. And the chances of recovering that from a 90,000-year-old bone were considered almost zero. You have to remember how fragile DNA is. While a cell has hundreds of copies of mitochondrial DNA, it only has 2 copies of nuclear DNA. The signal is infinitely weaker, and the book is infinitely longer and more complex. To piece together a full genome from the degraded, shattered fragments you find in an ancient bone would be like trying to reconstruct a whole library of encyclopedias that has been put through a paper shredder. And yet, the team in Leipzig decided to try. They were aided by a tremendous stroke of luck. The secret to their success was the cave itself. Denisova Cave, with its location deep in Siberia, has an average annual temperature that hovers just around freezing. It is a natural refrigerator. This constant frigid cold acted as a perfect preservative, dramatically slowing the rate of chemical decay that normally destroys DNA over time. The tiny finger bone had been resting in one of the best possible environments on Earth for long-term genetic preservation. So they began the painstaking work. They extracted more bone powder, used ever more refined techniques to isolate the DNA fragments, and fed them into their powerful sequencing machines. The process took months of intense, meticulous work. It all relied on the bedrock of modern genetics. The mainstream historical fact is that the Human Genome Project, completed in 2003, gave us the first complete reference map of our own DNA, the essential guide against which these ancient tattered maps could be read. And then, against all odds, they succeeded. They assembled a high-quality draft of the entire nuclear genome of the person who had owned that finger. For the first time, they could read the full story of the Denisovans. The first revelation confirmed their place in the family. When they compared the full genome to that of Neanderthals and modern humans, the picture became clear. The Denisovans were a sister group to the Neanderthals. Imagine a fork in the road of human evolution about 600,000 years ago. One path would lead to us, Homo sapiens, in Africa. The other path would lead to a common ancestor of Neanderthals and Denisovans. Then, perhaps 400,000 years ago, that second path forked again. One branch moved west, into Europe and the Middle East, and became the Neanderthals. The other branch moved east into Asia and became the Denisovans. They were our closest known extinct relatives, and they were each other's closest relatives. But the nuclear genome tells you more than just ancestry. It can reveal a person's entire history of intermingling. And when the team scanned the Denisovan genome, they found something remarkable. There were sections of it that were unambiguously Neanderthal in origin. The two groups, whose ancestors had split hundreds of thousands of years earlier, had met again and interbred. The human story was not one of isolated groups staying on their own paths. It was a messy, complex, and interconnected web. Then came the final, most staggering discovery of all. The team compared the Denisovan genome to the genomes of thousands of living people from all over the world. They ran a powerful statistical test, the scientific evidence known as the D statistic, which is designed to detect ancient gene flow. They compared the Denisovan genome to genomes from people in Africa, Europe, and mainland Asia, and they found nothing. As expected, there was no trace of Denisovan ancestry. But then they ran the comparison with genomes from modern people in Melanesia, from places like Papua New Guinea and the islands of the South Pacific. And the computer lit up. There, in the DNA of living Papuans and Aboriginal Australians, was a clear and powerful signal. Between 4 and 6% of their entire genome is Denisovan. You must pause and absorb the enormity of this. A human group that no one on Earth knew existed just a year prior was now proven to be an ancestor to millions of people alive today. The ancestors of modern Melanesians, as they migrated out of Africa and across Asia towards Australia, must have encountered and interbred with the Denisovans. Paleoanthropologists still argue about where and when this interbreeding took place. Was it in Southeast Asia? Or was the Denisovan range much, much larger than we currently imagine? This discovery transforms the Denisovans from a scientific curiosity into a part of our own living history. They are not truly extinct. They are not a dead end on the family tree. A piece of them lives on, carried in the cells of people thousands of miles away from that cold Siberian cave. The ghost was not just in the past. The ghost is within us. Our own genome is a quirky kind of genetic chimera, a mosaic of DNA from our primary Homo sapiens ancestors, but also containing these echoes from our encounters with our ancient, long-lost cousins. The story that began with a piece of bone no bigger than a child's tooth had ended by rewriting the story of what it means to be human. The revelation that the Denisovans live on within the DNA of modern people transformed the study of human evolution. It proved that the story of our past was not a simple linear march, but a web of interactions, meetings, and minglings between different kinds of humans. The discovery of that first tiny finger bone opened the floodgates. Scientists knew that Denisova Cave was a unique treasure chest, and they began to apply new and ever more powerful technologies to the thousands of other bone fragments that had been excavated from its layers over the years. Your journey takes you forward to 2012. You are back in the cave, with the archaeologists as they work their way through a deeper, older layer of sediment, Layer 12. dated to around 90,000 years ago. Once again, a small, unassuming bone fragment is found. It's about an inch long, a sliver from a thick-walled bone like an arm or a leg. It is, like the first Denisovan fossil, anatomically uninformative. It is impossible to tell by looking at it what kind of creature it belonged to. It is given the official designation Denisova 11, placed in a small plastic bag, and sent to a lab, just one of more than 2,000 similar bone fragments recovered from that layer. It is another needle in a haystack the size of a mountain. To even begin to search for a human needle in a haystack of animal bones, you need a new kind of tool. Trying to sequence the DNA of every single fragment would be impossibly expensive and time-consuming. This is where a clever new technique comes in, a way to sort the bones before committing to the full, arduous process of DNA analysis. The technique is called zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, or ZOO-MMS. You can think of it like this. If DNA is the full, complex book of life, collagen is like the book's durable leather cover. Collagen is the main structural protein in bone, and it survives for far longer than the fragile DNA molecule. Its basic structure is slightly different in different groups of animals, creating a unique chemical signature. The ZOO-MS process is a form of collagen fingerprinting. A tiny pinhead-sized sample is taken from the bone, and its collagen is broken down into smaller pieces called peptides. These peptides are then zapped with a laser and sent flying through a machine called a mass spectrometer, which measures their exact weight with incredible precision. The resulting pattern of different-sized peptides is a unique barcode, a fingerprint that can instantly tell you if the bone belonged to a deer, a bear, a wolf, or, just maybe, a hominin. The quirky world of early genetic research provides a stark contrast. Some of the first ancient DNA ever sequenced, back in 1984, was from the skin of a quagga, an extinct zebra. The techniques were so new that the idea of one day analyzing thousands of bone fragments like this would have been pure fantasy. The team decides to apply this new sorting method to the thousands of bone scraps from layer 12. One by one, they are sampled and fingerprinted. And then, they get a hit. The collagen barcode from the fragment known as Denisova 11 is a clear match for the hominin family. Out of more than 2,000 pieces tested, they have found one. A single precious piece of a human who lived and died here 90,000 years ago. The haystack has been searched, and the needle has been found. Now, and only now, is it worth sending this tiny bone on the long journey to Leipzig for the full DNA workup. The fragment, now one of the most important bone scraps on the planet, arrives at the Max Planck Institute. The now familiar process begins. In the sterile cleanroom, a tiny sample of bone dust is drilled from its core. The DNA is extracted. And as before, they start with the mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line. The question hangs in the air. What will it be? Will it be another Denisovan, adding to our sparse knowledge of that ghostly population? The sequence comes back from the machine. The geneticists run the comparison. The result is instant, and it is a shock. The mtDNA is not Denisovan. It is a perfect, unambiguous match for a Neanderthal. This discovery is, in itself, a monumental finding. It is the first time that the physical remains of a Neanderthal had ever been recovered from Denisova Cave. Their presence had been inferred from the traces of their DNA found in the Denisovan genome, but this was the first proof that they were physically there. It raises all sorts of new questions. Archaeologists still debate the nature of the occupations in Denisova Cave. Was it held by one group for millennia and then another? Or was it more like a timeshare, a convenient shelter used by different groups of Neanderthals and Denisovans as their hunting territories overlapped? This bone proves the two groups not only met, but at different times called the exact same place home. The story of Denisova 11 now has its first chapter. The mtDNA tells us with absolute certainty that this 90,000-year-old bone belonged to an individual whose mother was a Neanderthal. This is where the story could have ended, and it would have still been a remarkable discovery. But the team in Leipzig, of course, went on to analyze the nuclear DNA, the full story from both parents. And what they found there was not just remarkable. It was impossible. The story of Denisova 11, the bone from the girl with the Neanderthal mother, was already one for the history books. It proved that Neanderthals had physically inhabited the cave, placing them in the same space as the Denisovans at different times. But the final piece of the puzzle, the nuclear DNA, was about to elevate the discovery from remarkable to utterly world-changing. You are back in the laboratory in Leipzig. The team has embarked on the enormous task of sequencing the full genome from Denny's bone, hoping to build a second high-quality Neanderthal sequence to compare with their others. The data begins to pour out of the sequencing machines. The computer scientists assemble the billions of short, recovered DNA fragments, piecing them together against the reference maps of the human, Neanderthal, and Denisovan genomes. And as the picture of this individual's genetic makeup comes into focus, something is profoundly wrong. It is not the genome of a Neanderthal, but it is not the genome of a Denisovan either. It is both. The scientific evidence was breathtaking in its clarity. You have to picture your own genome. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes, one chromosome in each pair inherited from your mother, the other from your father. The geneticists looked at Denny's chromosome pairs. At any given point in the genome where there is a known, consistent difference between Neanderthals and Denisovans, they found that Denny's genome had both versions. One of her chromosomes carried the Neanderthal variant, and the other chromosome in the pair carried the Denisovan variant. It was a perfect 50-50 split, all the way across her entire genetic code. The conclusion was inescapable, and it sent a shock wave of disbelief and excitement through the scientific world. This was not an individual with some distant Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry. This was not the great-great-grandchild of an interspecies pairing. This was the direct first-generation offspring. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. Denny, as she was nicknamed by the team, was the first and only first-generation hybrid hominin ever discovered. The abstract idea of interbreeding, which they had proven through faint statistical echoes in other genomes, was now staring them in the face, embodied in the DNA of a single teenage girl who had died 90,000 years ago. She was a real-life example of the fundamental laws of heredity, first discovered by Gregor Mendel in his pea plant experiments, playing out between two different kinds of human. This discovery is so far beyond rare, it defies statistics. The odds of finding the fragile bone of a 90,000-year-old human are infinitesimal. The odds of that bone containing enough preserved DNA to be sequenced are even smaller. The odds of that one individual happening to be a first-generation hybrid are simply astronomical. It is arguably the luckiest find in the history of human origins research. Suddenly, this tiny bone fragment had a name and a story. By examining the bone's thickness, researchers could tell she was at least 13 years old. She was a teenager, the child of two worlds, walking the cold mammoth steppe perhaps unaware that her parentage was anything out of the ordinary. You might think of other hybrids, like a mule, the quirky, sterile offspring of a horse and a donkey. But the story of human hybrids is different, because we know they were not sterile. The genes of these ancient encounters have been passed down for millennia and are still with us today. But the revelations were not over. The power of this complete genome was so great that the geneticists could go one step further. They could computationally separate the DNA Denny had inherited from her mother and the DNA she had inherited from her father, allowing them to look at the genetic history of her parents as individuals. Her mother's genome was, as expected, Neanderthal. But when they looked at her father's Denisovan genome, they found another layer to the story. Scattered within his DNA were tiny, ancient fragments of Neanderthal ancestry. This was not a recent mixing. This was from a Neanderthal ancestor in his own family tree who had lived hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of generations before he was born. This final detail is perhaps the most profound. Denny was not the product of a single, chance, one-in-a-million encounter. Her existence was the result of a long, complex history of contact between these two groups in and around the Altai Mountains. They had been meeting and occasionally mixing for a very, very long time. The cave was not a borderland between two hostile strangers. It was a meeting place. This completely reshapes our vision of the Ice Age human world. It was not a world of separate, isolated species, but a fluid, interconnected network of diverse populations that, when they met, sometimes saw each other not as enemies, but as partners. Of course, this one fossil cannot tell us about the nature of these encounters. Anthropologists still argue whether the interactions between these different human groups were typically peaceful and consensual, or if they were sometimes the result of conflict and violence. We cannot know if Denny was the child of a star-crossed love story or a darker, more tragic event. But what we do know is that she existed. And her bones, after 90,000 years of science, have allowed us to hear one of the most extraordinary stories in human history. The existence of Denny, this one teenage girl, has fundamentally changed the story we tell about ourselves. For over a century, the prevailing model of human evolution was a simple, almost linear progression. A clean branching tree where different species of humans lived in relative isolation, with one eventually replacing the other. We, Homo sapiens, were the sole survivors, the winners of an evolutionary contest. Denny's DNA, and the ghost of the Denisovans within it, has shattered that simple picture. The story of our past is not a clean, branching tree. It is a tangled web, a braided stream, where the currents of different human populations met, merged, and flowed together. The very concept of what a species is becomes blurry and almost meaningless in the context of our own recent past. The old definition, separate species cannot produce fertile offspring, clearly does not apply here. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans were able to have children, and those children were healthy enough to be integrated into their societies and pass on their mixed heritage for thousands of generations. The scientific evidence for this is undeniable. It is written in the genome of almost every non-African person on Earth today, in the form of a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and it's present in the genomes of millions of Melanesians and East Asians who carry the legacy of the Denisovans. We are all, in a very real sense, hybrids. This forces us to imagine a past that was perhaps far more complex, and maybe even more tolerant than we ever gave it credit for. It's easy to picture the world of the Ice Age as one of constant, brutal conflict between us and them. But Denny's existence suggests that when these different groups met at the crossroads of the Altai Mountains, their interactions were not always hostile. Sometimes they were intimate. It adds a crucial layer of complexity to the mainstream, out-of-Africa model of human expansion. As our ancestors moved across the globe, they didn't just replace the archaic humans they met, they joined with them. Of course, this doesn't mean their coexistence was always peaceful, but it does mean that the barriers between these groups were permeable, both culturally and biologically. The great debate continues. Historians still argue whether the final disappearance of the Neanderthals and Denisovans was a result of this interbreeding, a genetic swamping, where their smaller populations were simply absorbed into the much larger wave of modern humans, or if it was driven by other factors like climate change and direct competition. But let us bring it back to the fossil itself. Denisova 11. A single 1-inch shard of bone from a long-dead teenager. In the entire pantheon of rare fossils, it holds a unique and almost untouchable status. A two-headed reptile is the product of a 1 in a billion biological accident. A first-generation hybrid between two distinct human populations is the product of an equally rare biological and social event. To then find the specific, fossilized remains of that one individual 90,000 years later is a statistical miracle layered on top of a statistical miracle. It is a discovery so lucky it feels like it was a message left for us to find. A quirky and fascinating new field called paleoepigenetics is now even trying to study how Denny's hybrid genes were regulated, which ones were turned on or off, to understand how her body coped with its dual heritage, a story even deeper than the DNA sequence itself. Denny's bone is the ultimate example of a fossil that is visually meaningless but contextually profound. Its story was not written in its shape or size, but in the invisible, nigh indestructible code of life it happened to preserve. It is a story told in A's, T's, A's, and G's. It is a story of genetics. But now, our journey takes us away from the invisible and back to the tangible. We leave this world of genetic ghosts and spectral data and travel to a different kind of fossil site, one that preserves its secrets not in a hidden code, but in plain, spectacular sight. Our next subjects are the complete opposite of Denny's bone. They are fossils that are visually breathtaking, specimens that have preserved not just the hard bones, but the very skin, scales, muscles, and even the last meals of creatures that have been dead for tens of millions of years. We are moving from a story written in a genetic sequence to a story written on the very surface of an animal's body. We are going to meet the dinosaur mummies. The story written in Denny's genes was a whisper, a secret code from the past that required miraculous technology to decipher. Now, you must prepare yourself for a story that is the complete opposite. It is not a whisper, it is a shout. It is not a code to be deciphered, but a picture of breathtaking clarity. You are about to meet the dinosaur mummies, fossils so perfectly preserved, they seem to defy the very laws of decay. First, you must adjust your expectations. When you hear the word mummy, your mind likely travels to the dry, linen-wrapped royalty of ancient Egypt, their skin and hair preserved by elaborate embalming and a bone-dry climate. A dinosaur mummy is a different kind of miracle. You are not looking at preserved, desiccated flesh. The flesh is long gone. What you are looking at is still a fossil, a creature turned to stone. The miracle lies in what was fossilized. Imagine a dinosaur dying in a hot, arid, or semi-arid environment. Instead of immediately being covered or scavenged, its carcass lies exposed to the sun and dry wind. It desiccates. The skin dries out, shrinks, and becomes tough and leathery, pulling taut against the skeleton like natural shrink wrap. Then, before this dried-out husk can be destroyed by the elements, the second part of the miracle occurs. Rapid burial. A flash flood smothers it in sand, or a sandstorm buries it in a dune. The hardened skin now acts as a perfect mold. As the skin and other tissues slowly decay over millions of years, they leave a minutely detailed impression of themselves in the surrounding sediment. Sometimes a thin film of carbon is left behind, an echo of the original organic material. The result is a complete, three-dimensional skeleton, still cloaked in a perfect stony cast of its skin, scales, and sometimes even its muscles and tendons. It is the ghost of the flesh, preserved with a fidelity that should be impossible. Your journey to meet the first of these incredible fossils takes you to the rugged Badlands of Wyoming. The year is 1908. You are with one of the most famous families in the history of paleontology, the Sternbergs. The patriarch, Charles Hazelius Sternberg, and his three sons were legendary fossil hunters, tough and resourceful men who spent their lives scouring the American West for the bones of ancient monsters. One hot summer day, while prospecting in the Lance Formation, one of the sons, George, spotted a series of articulated vertebrae weathering out of a sandstone bluff. As they began to dig, their excitement grew. It was a large, duck-billed dinosaur, a hadrosaur. But as they cleared away the rock, they realized they had found something far beyond a normal skeleton. The bones were not clean. They were encased in a dark, patterned layer of stone. Charles Sternberg, with his decades of experience, recognized it immediately. It was the skin. They were not just excavating a skeleton. They were excavating the animal itself, or the closest thing to it anyone had ever seen. The painstaking work of extracting the multi-ton block of sandstone took the rest of the summer. Eventually, it was sold to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, a mainstream institution that, under the direction of Henry Fairfield Osborn, was becoming the world's leading center for dinosaur research. There, in the museum basement, the fossil was prepared and studied, and it astonished everyone who saw it. Catalogued as AMNH 5060, this Edmontosaurus mummy remains one of the greatest fossil treasures ever found. You see it now in your mind's eye. The animal is lying on its back, its head turned to the side, its limbs slightly drawn in. It is almost complete from the skull to the hips, though its tail and back feet were sadly lost to erosion millions of years ago. But it is the skin envelope that captures your attention. The scientific evidence is right there on the surface. You can see the texture of its hide, preserved in stunning detail. The skin is not made of large, overlapping scales like a snake, but of thousands of small, bumpy, non-overlapping scales called tubercles. Most of the body is covered in a background of tiny, circular tubercles, but interspersed are clusters of larger 5- or 6-sided scales, especially on its forelimbs. This intricate pattern immediately sparked a debate that continues to this day. Paleontologists still argue about the function of these different scale patterns. Were the larger clusters on the arms a form of armor? Were they for recognizing members of their own species? Or were they perhaps brightly colored, used for display in mating rituals, like the tail of a peacock? What was most surprising to the original researchers was how thin and delicate the skin was. They had expected such a colossal beast to have a thick, leathery hide, like an elephant or a rhino. Instead, its skin was barely a few millimeters thick, suggesting it was not built for defense. But the preservation didn't stop with the skin. Hundreds of ossified tendons, looking like a lattice of bony rods, were preserved along the spine. These acted like natural steel cables, helping to support the animal's immense weight. Even the faint impression of its keratinous beak, the rhamphotheca, was preserved, a quirky tidbit showing that its mouth was more complex and bird-like than its bare skull suggested. This one fossil single-handedly rewrote our understanding of what a dinosaur looked like in the flesh. It was the first true dinosaur mummy, and it set the stage for even more spectacular discoveries to come. For nearly a century, the Sternberg Mummy was the gold standard, a peerless treasure that paleontologists assumed could never be surpassed. It was a perfect fossil, the best we could ever hope to find. But the Earth, it turns out, had other secrets in store. In the year 2000, your journey takes you to the sandstone badlands of the Judith River Formation in Montana. A team of amateur fossil hunters, exploring a remote canyon, stumbled upon the skeleton of a young dinosaur weathering out of a cliff. As they began to excavate, they realized they had found something that would once again rewrite the definition of a perfect fossil. The creature was a juvenile Brachylophosaurus, a type of hadrosaur known for the short, flat, paddle-like crest on its skull. The team nicknamed the specimen Leonardo, and the name stuck. Leonardo was not just another skeleton, and not just another mummy. It was a step beyond. You see it now, not as bones in the ground, but as the fully prepared specimen, an icon of paleontology. Where the Sternberg mummy was missing its tail and hind limbs, Leonardo is almost entirely complete. And the skin preservation is on another level entirely. Over 90% of his body is still cloaked in the detailed impression of his hide. The resolution is so fine that you can see delicate folds and wrinkles in the skin around his joints, lending him a startlingly lifelike quality. The familiar pattern of bumpy tubercles is there, but with Leonardo, scientists could map out the different scale patterns across the entire body, from the fine scales on his neck to the larger polygonal scales on his shoulders. But the preservation went deeper than the skin. In certain areas, the fossil captured the three-dimensional shape of the underlying muscles, allowing paleontologists to reconstruct his musculature with a new and unprecedented level of accuracy. His keratinous beak was preserved, and even more surprisingly, so was the impression of a soft tissue structure running down his back, a kind of low, fleshy frill or crest that would have been completely unknown from the skeleton alone. Leonardo was not just an impression of a dinosaur's surface, it was a near-perfect cast of the dinosaur itself. But even these incredible features are not what makes Leonardo one of the rarest fossils on the planet. To see his greatest secret, you have to look inside. Within his chest cavity, in the region where his stomach and intestines would have been, the paleontologists found a large, compacted mass of fossilized organic material. It was a gut bolus. It was the preserved contents of his digestive tract. It was his last meal. The sheer improbability of this is staggering. To find a skeleton is a miracle. To find its skin is a miracle squared. To find what it was eating for lunch 77 million years ago is a miracle taken to a whole new power. This gut content became the focus of intense scientific study. You are now looking over the shoulder of a paleobotanist as they examine a small sample of this dark, compressed material under a high-powered microscope. The scientific evidence they are looking for is microscopic, but definitive. They are hunting for fossilized pollen grains and the preserved waxy outer layer of leaves, known as cuticles. These tiny botanical fingerprints can be identified and matched to the plants that produced them. And what they found inside Leonardo was a veritable Cretaceous salad bar. His last meal was a diverse mix of the local flora. The bulk of it was made of various ferns and conifers, like cypress and redwood relatives, but mixed in with the leaves and pollen of early flowering plants, or angiosperms. The mainstream historical fact is that Leonardo lived during a period of great botanical upheaval called the Angiosperm Terrestrial Revolution, when the first flowering plants were beginning to diversify and compete with the ancient gymnosperm forests. Leonardo's stomach contents are direct proof that dinosaurs were eating these new and nutritious food sources, like magnolias and their relatives. This discovery is a key piece of data in a long-running debate. Paleobotanists and paleontologists still argue about the coevolution of dinosaurs and plants. Did the pressure from giant, hungry herbivores like Leonardo drive the evolution of new, fast-growing flowering plants? Or did the arrival of these new plants allow the hadrosaurs to become so successful? The sheer variety was stunning. The team identified pollen from more than 40 different types of plants, showing that Leonardo was not a picky eater. He was a generalist, a browser who moved through the forest, nibbling on a wide array of low-growing vegetation. One thing that was notably absent was grass. The great grassy plains of our modern world had not yet evolved. The quirky and slightly gross part of the story came from an even closer look at the chewed-up plant matter. The scientists found tiny telltale burrows and tunnels within the vegetation, the work of parasites. Leonardo, it seems, had a case of worms. As a final tidbit, many herbivorous dinosaurs are found with collections of smooth stones in their stomach cavities, known as gastroliths, which they used to help grind up tough plants. Leonardo had none, suggesting his digestion worked differently, perhaps relying more on thorough chewing with his famous batteries of teeth. From this one incredible fossil, we have a more complete picture of this animal's life and death than we ever thought possible. We know what his skin looked like, how his muscles were built, where he lived, what he ate, and even what ailed him. Leonardo gave us a picture of a dinosaur's life with a clarity that was once the stuff of science fiction. We knew what he looked like, what he ate, and what parasites plagued him. You have to ask yourself, how could the fossil record possibly offer us anything more? How could a fossil be more perfect than Leonardo? For the answer, your journey must take you to a place you would never expect to find a dinosaur. You are not in the sun-baked badlands of the American West. You are in the vast industrial landscape of northern Alberta, Canada. The year is 2011. You are standing in the Suncor Millennium Mine, one of the largest open-pit oil sand mines on Earth. The scale of this place is almost beyond human. The air is thick with the petroleum-like scent of bitumen. Colossal trucks, the size of small houses, crawl across the landscape, and giant mechanical shovels, capable of moving 100 tons of earth in a single scoop, systematically carve away the ground. The rock they are mining, the McMurray Formation, is from the early Cretaceous, about 110 million years ago. It is not the sediment of an ancient floodplain. It is the fossilized mud of a seabed. This rock was laid down at the bottom of a vast inland sea, the mainstream historical Western Interior Seaway, which once split North America in two. This is a place where paleontologists expect to find the fossilized remains of marine life, giant swimming reptiles like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, Finding a land-dwelling animal here would be as likely as finding a complete elephant skeleton on the floor of the North Sea today. But on March 21st, 2011, a heavy equipment operator named Sean Funk was carving into a section of the mine wall when he noticed something strange in a bucket full of rock he had just scooped up. Amidst the dark grey uniform shale were several lumps of a harder brownish rock covered in a strange, repeating, almost geometric pattern. To his eye, it looked something like diamond-shaped paving stones. With a fleet of trucks waiting and a strict schedule to keep, it would have been easy to ignore it, to dump the load and move on. But in a moment of curiosity that would change the course of paleontology, he stopped his massive machine, and he called his supervisor. What he had found was not a marine reptile. It was a dinosaur. And it was not just any dinosaur. As the painstaking work of excavation and preparation began, it was revealed to be a new species of nodosaur, a member of the great family of armored dinosaurs, the ankylosaurs. You can picture it in life. A low-slung, herbivorous tank, about 18 feet long and weighing nearly 3,000 pounds. It was covered from snout to hips in a formidable coat of bony armor designed to defend it from the great meat-eating dinosaurs of its time. The fossil was eventually named Borealopelta markmicheli, Northern Shield, for its origin and its armor, and in honor of the museum technician Mark Mitchell, who would go on to spend more than 7,000 hours over 5.5 years meticulously freeing the creature from its stone tomb. And as he worked, the true miracle of the specimen was revealed. The hadrosaur mummies, as spectacular as they are, were essentially flattened during their fossilization, compressed by the weight of the rock above them. They are magnificent, but they are two-dimensional roadkills. The Borealopelta is different. You see it now, and you can barely believe it is a fossil. It looks like a statue. It is preserved in perfect, uncrushed, three-dimensional detail. It is not a skeleton with skin impressions. It is the front half of the animal itself, as if it had simply laid down for a nap and turned to stone. The level of preservation is almost beyond belief. You can see the exact living arrangement of its armor. The bony plates, called osteoderms, are still sheathed in the fossilized remnants of the skin they grew from. You can trace the patterns of smaller, pebbly scales that filled the gaps between the larger plates. Rising from its shoulders are two enormous 20-inch long spikes, one still perfectly preserved in its life position, pointing outwards and back. But the most incredible detail is one you can only see with a microscope. The scientific evidence, gathered using chemical analysis, shows a dark, carbonaceous film still coating the armor plates. This is the fossilized remnant of the keratin sheath that covered the bone in life, the same material your fingernails are made of. This proves that in life, the armor plates and spikes would have been even larger, longer, and sharper than the underlying bone, a detail previously only guessed at. This stunningly lifelike appearance initially caused some confusion. As a quirky tidbit, the first people to see the fossil in the mine assumed it had to be a marine reptile, because they simply could not believe that a land animal could have been preserved so perfectly in marine sediments. Its discovery has fueled a long-running discussion. Paleontologists still argue about the exact sequence of events that led to its perfect preservation. The leading theory is a bloat and float scenario, where the dinosaur's body was washed out to sea by a flooding river, floated on the surface for days or weeks thanks to decomposition gases, and then, once it burst, sank rapidly to the anoxic seafloor, where the mud entombed it before any large marine scavengers could tear it apart. Whatever the precise mechanism, The result is the most perfectly preserved armored dinosaur ever found, a creature that looks like it might wake up at any moment. The sheer, three-dimensional perfection of the Borealopelta mummy was a discovery that reset the boundaries of what was thought possible. It was not just a collection of bones, or even a detailed skin impression. It was, for all intents and purposes, a dinosaur in the flesh, turned to stone. This unprecedented level of preservation allowed scientists to move beyond questions of anatomy and ask things that had, for over a century, been confined to the realm of artistic license and pure speculation. And they started with the most basic and most elusive question of all. What color was it? For most of paleontology's history, the color of a dinosaur was anyone's guess. But in the 21st century, a new window into the past opened. Scientists discovered that microscopic, pigment-filled structures called melanosomes, the very same organelles that give color to your hair and the feathers of a bird, were durable enough to survive the fossilization process. They are tiny capsules of color, and their shape corresponds to their pigment. Long, thin, sausage-shaped eumelanosomes produce black and gray colors. Round, flattened, meatball-shaped pheomelanosomes produce reddish browns and yellows. By studying these fossilized microbodies with powerful scanning electron microscopes, we can, for the first time, read the ghost of a creature's color palette. The team studying Borealopelta carefully took microscopic samples from the dark, carbonaceous films that remained of its skin and keratinous sheaths. What they found was a treasure trove of chemical fossils. The skin was packed with pheomelanosomes. The scientific evidence was clear. In life, Borealopelta was a reddish-brown or russet-colored animal. But the discovery that truly stunned the researchers was not the color, but the pattern. By sampling different parts of the body, they found that the pigment was heavily concentrated on the animal's back, while the skin on its underside was much lighter, with very few melanosomes at all. This pattern is instantly recognizable to any biologist. It is called countershading. You see it everywhere in the modern animal kingdom, from sharks and penguins to squirrels and deer. An animal with a dark back and a light belly is using a sophisticated form of camouflage. When sunlight shines down from above, it illuminates the dark back and casts the light belly in shadow. The effect cancels out the natural play of light and shadow, making the animal's body appear optically flat and helping it blend into its background. It is a fundamental principle of camouflage, first written about in detail by naturalists like Charles Darwin. And here it was, perfectly preserved on a 3,000-pound armored dinosaur. The implications of this are profound. You have to ask yourself, why would a living tank need to hide? This creature was a walking fortress, covered in bony plates and armed with gigantic spikes. Common sense would suggest it had little to fear. But the presence of countershading tells a different story. It means that despite its formidable armor, Borealopelta was under such intense predation pressure that its primary survival strategy was not to fight, but to avoid being seen in the first place. It gives you a terrifying glimpse into the food chain of its world. The predators it faced, likely gigantic carcharodontosaurs, were so effective that even a heavily armored dinosaur needed to be a master of stealth. This has fueled an ongoing debate. Paleoecologists still argue about the primary function of ankylosaurian armor. Was it for active defense, for display to attract mates? Or, as this discovery suggests, was it a defense of last resort, to be used only when its camouflage failed? But the secrets of this incredible mummy were not only skin deep. Just like Leonardo, the Borealopelta had its last meal preserved. Inside its abdominal cavity was a distinct, football-sized, compacted ball of fossilized plant matter, a collolyte. Once again, scientists had a direct window into the diet of a dinosaur on the last day of its life. They analyzed the material, looking for those same botanical fingerprints, leaf cuticles, and pollen. And they found another surprise. Leonardo, the hadrosaur, had been a generalist, eating more than 40 different kinds of plants. The Borealopelta was the exact opposite. Its stomach was almost entirely full of one thing: ferns. Of the identifiable leaf fragments, an astonishing 88% came from a single group of common ferns. It was an extremely picky eater, carefully selecting its favorite food from the Cretaceous undergrowth. But there was another quirky detail mixed in with the ferns: tiny fragments of charcoal. This indicates that the animal had been grazing in a burn scar, a section of forest that had recently been swept by a wildfire. It was likely taking advantage of a fern flush, the rapid growth of ferns that is often the first sign of life to return to a scorched landscape. This one fossil gives us an incredible snapshot in time. A reddish-brown, camouflaged dinosaur, selectively grazing on new fern growth in a recently burned forest. On the morning of the day it would be swept out to sea and become one of the greatest fossils ever found. You pull back from the image of the picky, camouflaged Borealopelta grazing in a burned-out forest. You have now met the dinosaur mummies, a trifecta of fossils so spectacular they belong in their own category of wonder. From the pioneering discovery of the Sternberg hadrosaur to the unprecedented biological detail of Leonardo to the three-dimensional perfection of the northern shield, these fossils have collectively revolutionized our vision of the prehistoric world. They have taken dinosaurs from the realm of movie monsters and skeletal curiosities and transformed them into plausible, living, breathing animals. Before these discoveries, our reconstructions of dinosaurs were exercises in educated guesswork. You can look at the mainstream historical fact of the first dinosaur skeleton ever mounted for display. A Hadrosaurus in Philadelphia in 1868. It was a groundbreaking moment, but it was just a skeleton, and since the skull was missing, the head they placed on it was a complete, sculpted fantasy. For over a century, that was the best we could do. We had the bones, the framework, but the living creature that clothed that framework was a ghost. These mummies have given that ghost a body. They have given us the gift of texture. We now know that hadrosaurs were not covered in the thick, leathery hide of an elephant, but in a surprisingly delicate skin of bumpy, non-overlapping tubercles. We know that nodosaurs were sheathed in a complex mosaic of pebbly scales and giant, keratin-covered osteoderms. They have given us the gift of shape. We can see the soft tissue frills, the true form of their beaks, the powerful curve of their underlying muscles. They have even, against all odds, given us the gift of color, revealing the reddish-brown camouflage of Borealopelta and proving that a dinosaur's palate was not a mystery forever lost to time. And most remarkably, they have given us the gift of behavior, preserved in the most direct way imaginable. We have looked into their stomachs and read the last chapters of their lives. We've seen the difference between a generalist salad bar browser like Leonardo and a picky fern specialist like Borealopelta. The science of taphonomy, the study of how these incredible fossils were made, is a story of miracles. By analyzing the surrounding rock, we can see the two distinct pathways to perfection: the arid desiccation and rapid river burial that flattened and preserved the hadrosaurs, and the bizarre, bloat and float journey that carried the Borealopelta to its perfect three-dimensional entombment in the anoxic silence of the seafloor. Of course, these scaly wonders don't represent all dinosaurs. A quirky and important tidbit is that other sites of exceptional preservation, like the Yixian Formation, where our two-headed lizard was found, have revealed that many other dinosaur lineages, particularly the theropods, were covered in a wild array of dino fuzz and even complex bird-like feathers. This has sparked a fascinating debate. Paleontologists still argue whether the scaly skin seen on these mummies was the original ancestral condition for all dinosaurs, or if some groups, like the hadrosaurs, might have secondarily lost primitive feathers that their distant ancestors once possessed. The family tree of dinosaur skin is still being drawn. We have now journeyed through a gallery of impossible treasures. We have seen a fossil that preserved a biological mistake, a birth that should not have happened. We have seen a fossil that preserved a social interaction, a moment of shared shelter that defied expectations. And we have just seen fossils that preserve the very skin and color of a creature, the physical reality of its life. These are fossils of states of being: birth, rest, appearance, death. But what if a fossil could preserve something even more ephemeral? What if it could capture not a state of being, but a specific, fleeting action? An act so private, so intimate, and so statistically unlikely to be interrupted and immortalized in stone that it seems to border on the absurd. Our final journey of the night will take us to one such fossil. It is a fossil that captures not the beginning of a life, nor its end, but the very act that ensures life's continuation. You are leaving behind the world of giants, of camouflage and last meals. You are going to a quiet, toxic lake in ancient Germany to witness a moment of prehistoric intimacy, frozen in time for 47 million years. Your final destination is a place of serene, almost impossible beauty, and equally impossible danger. You leave the age of dinosaurs far behind and travel forward to the Eocene epoch, 47 million years ago. You are in what will one day be central Germany. The world you have entered is a hothouse. This is a period of intense global warmth, a greenhouse Earth where subtropical forests grow even in the polar regions. The air around you is warm, heavy, and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. You are standing on the shore of a placid lake, surrounded by a dense, jungle-like forest of palm trees, laurels, and climbing vines. This is the Messel Pit, another of the world's great Lagerstätten, or sites of exceptional fossil preservation. But its method of immortalizing its residents is different from any we have seen before. The fossils here are renowned for their completeness and exquisite detail. They preserve the fur of mammals, the individual veins in a bat's wings, the iridescent sheen on a beetle's carapace, and the outlines of soft tissues, all with photographic clarity. For a long time, the Messel Pit was a mine, where oil shale was extracted to produce fuel. It's a mainstream historical fact that this priceless scientific treasure was almost lost forever in the 1970s, when it was slated to become a municipal garbage dump, a fate it only escaped thanks to the passionate efforts of the scientific community. The forest around you is teeming with the new masters of this world, the mammals. The dinosaurs are long gone, and in their place, a stunning diversity of mammals is evolving. You might see a small herd of Propaleotherium, pygmy horses no bigger than a fox, delicately picking their way through the undergrowth. In the trees above, a family of early primates, with grasping hands and long tails, leap from branch to branch. You might even glimpse the quirky and formidable Gastornis, a 6-foot-tall, flightless bird with a massive, powerful beak that was long thought to be a fearsome predator, but is now believed to have been a gentle herbivore. This world feels almost modern, yet deeply strange. But the key to this place, the secret to its perfect preservation, is the lake itself. This is no ordinary body of water. It is a maar, a special kind of deep volcanic lake. You can picture its violent birth. Sometime earlier, groundwater had seeped deep into the earth, hitting a pocket of superheated magma. The water instantly flashed into steam, resulting in a colossal subterranean explosion known as a phreatomagmatic eruption. This explosion blasted a deep, steep-sided, circular crater in the landscape, which over time filled with rain and groundwater. Because the crater was so deep and its sides so steep, the water did not circulate. It became stratified, with warm, oxygen-rich water on top and a deep, permanent layer of cold, stagnant, and completely anoxic water at the bottom. This oxygen-free bottom layer was the first part of the preservation trap. No scavengers could live in the toxic depths, and the microbes that drive decay could not function. Any creature that died and sank into the soft, silty mud at the bottom of the lake would be safe from decomposition, gently entombed in what would one day become oil shale. The scientific evidence for this is the oil shale itself, which is made of billions of layers of microscopic algae that bloomed and died in the surface waters and then settled into the anoxic deep, their organic matter preserved perfectly. But the lake was more than just a preservative. It was a killer. The dormant volcano beneath it was not entirely dead. It still leaked gases from the Earth's mantle, primarily carbon dioxide, which dissolved under pressure into the deep, cold water at the bottom of the lake, turning it into a vast subterranean reservoir of invisible poison. And periodically, disaster would strike. Geologists still argue about the exact triggers of the lake's deadly outbursts. Were they caused by seasonal turnover of the water, a small underwater landslide, or some other disturbance? Whatever the cause, the result was a limnic eruption. You can imagine it happening on a still, hot afternoon. Some disturbance causes the deep, CO2-saturated water to suddenly rise. As the pressure is released, the dissolved gas erupts out of the solution, like opening a shaken bottle of soda. A vast, silent, invisible cloud of carbon dioxide, which is heavier than air, would bubble up from the center of the lake. It would not be a violent explosion, but a quiet, deadly cloud that would spread out from the lake's surface, hugging the ground and flowing into the surrounding forest. For any air-breathing animal caught in its path, death would be instantaneous and silent. A bird flying over the water, a bat hunting insects above the surface, a pygmy horse drinking at the shore, all would be asphyxiated in an instant, their lungs filled with unbreathable gas. They would simply fall, without a struggle, into the water, and then sink slowly down into the perfect, anoxic preservative mud below. This beautiful, tranquil lake was a recurring, silent death trap. And it is here, in this treacherous paradise, that a pair of turtles chose a very inopportune moment for an act of intimacy. You are now a witness to a moment of prehistoric intimacy. A scene so private and so improbable it seems it could never be preserved. In that beautiful but deadly volcanic lake in Eocene Germany, a pair of turtles is about to make history. To find two animals fossilized together is rare. To find them locked in combat, like the fighting dinosaurs, is a 1 in a million find. But to find two vertebrate animals fossilized in the very act of mating is something else entirely. It is, to date, a one-of-a-kind discovery. There is simply nothing else like it in the entire fossil record of backboned animals. The story is different for invertebrates. You can find insects, spiders, and other tiny creatures trapped in amber. Their brief, final moments of courtship and copulation immortalized in golden resin. But for larger, more powerful animals like vertebrates, the specific set of circumstances required for such a preservation is almost impossibly narrow. The act must be interrupted by an event so sudden and so complete that the pair is killed and buried simultaneously without being moved or separated. The death trap of Messel Lake was just such a perfect, instantaneous killer. You are there with the paleontologists as they work the layers of soft, dark oil shale. The rock is split carefully along its laminations with a wide, flat blade. A slab separates, and there on the freshly exposed surface, on the plate and counterplate, are the two creatures. They are two turtles, their skeletons perfectly articulated, their shells flattened but complete. The dark bones stand out in stark contrast to the light brown shale. But it is their positioning that immediately draws the eye. They are not side by side. They are intertwined, their bodies facing away from each other, but their rear ends brought closely together. The species is identified as Allaeochelys crassosculpta, an extinct freshwater turtle. To understand this ancient creature, you can look to its only living relative, the peculiar pig-nosed turtle of Australia and New Guinea. Like its modern cousin, Allaeochelys was a highly aquatic turtle, with paddle-like front limbs that looked more like the flippers of a sea turtle than the clawed feet of a pond slider. This tells you it spent almost its entire life in the water, perfectly at home in the warm, placid environment of the Messel Mar. The Eocene was, after all, a mainstream historical period of extreme global warmth, a super greenhouse world where a place like Germany would have felt like a tropical paradise, ideal for such a creature. But how can the scientists be so certain about what these two turtles were doing? The conclusion is not a romantic guess. It is based on a series of clear, scientific clues. You are the detective again, examining the evidence. First, you look at the two individuals. One is noticeably larger than the other. You examine their tails. The larger individual has a short, stubby tail. The smaller individual has a much longer, thicker tail at the base. This is Exhibit A, clear sexual dimorphism. In many turtle species today, this is the classic difference between the sexes. The female is often larger, while the male is smaller, but equipped with a long, muscular tail that houses his reproductive organs. The two fossils fit this pattern perfectly. One is male, the other female. Next, you look at their precise positioning. The two turtles are oriented tail to tail. To understand the significance of this, you have to know a little about turtle romance. Mating is an awkward affair for a creature encased in a giant, inflexible shell. The male needs to be able to maneuver his tail underneath the rim of the female's shell to align their cloacas, the single all-purpose opening used for reproduction and waste. The male's long tail is the essential tool for this job. The position of the two fossils, with the male's tail perfectly aligned to make contact with the female's, is a perfect snapshot of this cloacal kiss. It is not a position they would be in during a fight, and it is far too specific to be the result of two carcasses randomly drifting together after death. The anatomical evidence of their sex and the circumstantial evidence of their posture combine to form an undeniable case. This find also adds a small piece to the much larger puzzle of turtle evolution. Biologists still argue about the evolutionary origin of the turtle's unique shell. Did the ribs expand and fuse first, or was it the bony plates in the skin that linked up? While these fossils don't solve that ancient mystery, they do provide a perfect picture of a fully formed, successful species. A quirky tidbit about their modern relatives is that some female turtles can store sperm for months or even years after a single mating, a useful adaptation when mates are scarce. For these ancient turtles, this one encounter may have been intended to ensure the continuation of their lineage for a long time to come. Instead, it was their last. You are there in the warm, placid water of the Messel Lake, a silent witness to this final, intimate moment. The two turtles, a male and a female of the species Allaeochelys, are preoccupied, engaged in the ancient biological imperative to create the next generation. They are blissfully unaware that the very lake that has given them life is about to become their tomb. The trigger is silent and subtle. Perhaps a small tremor from the dormant volcano below, or a shift in water temperature, disturbs the delicate stratification of the lake. Deep below, where the pressure is immense and the water is saturated with dissolved carbon dioxide, a change begins. The deep water begins to rise, and as the pressure lessens, the dissolved CO2 erupts out of the solution. It is not a violent, fiery explosion. It is a quiet, fizzing release, as if a cap has been taken off a colossal bottle of soda. A vast, invisible cloud of gas surfaces and begins to spread. It is heavier than air, and it flows like a phantom river across the lake's surface and into the surrounding forest. A jewel-toned beetle, resting on a water lily, stops moving. A flock of primitive birds, swooping low over the water, drop from the sky like stones. A small primate, pausing at the water's edge for a drink, simply lies down and never gets up again. Death is instantaneous, silent, and absolute. This is not speculation. The 1986 Lake Nyos disaster in Cameroon, a mainstream and tragic historical event, showed us exactly what a limnic eruption can do, as a similar cloud of CO2 silently killed over 1,700 people in the surrounding valleys. But you find yourself thinking the turtles should have been safe. They were underwater, after all, holding their breath. Their shells offered them protection. This is where the story takes its final, tragic turn. The turtles were not safe. In fact, due to a unique and marvelous biological adaptation, they were in more danger than any of the creatures on the shore. The secret lies in their skin. If you were to look at their only living relative, the pig-nosed turtle, you would notice that its skin is not the tough, leathery, or scaly hide of most other turtles. It is soft, pliant, and almost velvety. And if you looked at it under a microscope, you would find that it is packed with an incredibly dense network of capillaries, tiny blood vessels just beneath the surface. This unique skin allows the turtle to do something amazing. It can breathe through its skin. The process is called cutaneous respiration. By absorbing dissolved oxygen directly from the water into its bloodstream, a pig-nosed turtle can supplement the air in its lungs, allowing it to stay submerged for incredibly long periods. It is a brilliant evolutionary solution to a life spent almost entirely in water. And the fossil evidence suggests that the ancient Allaeochelys had the very same adaptation. This is the heart of the tragic irony. The adaptation that was the key to their success was, in the toxic chemistry of Messel Lake, their fatal flaw. They could hold their breath to keep the gaseous CO2 out of their lungs, but they could not close their skin. As the lake erupted, the concentration of dissolved carbon dioxide in the water around them would have skyrocketed. Their porous, hypervascular skin, so efficient at absorbing life-giving oxygen, was just as efficient at absorbing this deadly poison. The CO2 would have passed directly through their skin into their bloodstream, causing rapid acidosis, suffocation on a cellular level, and death. They were poisoned from the outside in, their own unique biology turned against them. Now, picture their final moments. They are physically coupled and preoccupied. Mating is an exhausting activity that requires intense focus. Scientists still debate the exact metabolic and mental state of mating reptiles, arguing whether they are so focused that they are less aware of their surroundings, or if they are simply physically unable to react to threats. As they grew fatigued, they would have become less buoyant, sinking slowly from the relatively safe surface waters down into the deeper layers of the lake, where the concentration of toxic gas was even higher. They would have felt a growing lethargy, a creeping paralysis as their bodies were saturated with poison. There was likely no struggle, no frantic attempt to escape. They simply lost consciousness and, still entwined, sank together into the soft, black, anoxic mud at the bottom of the lake. The gentle sediment drifted down around them, locking their final intimate posture in place, preserving a moment of life's continuation through a sudden and perfect death. And so, with a quiet ripple in the dark water, the story of the turtles comes to a close. Their final intimate moment is locked away in the soft mud, destined to become a single, perfect page in the great library of the earth. You now pull your consciousness back, away from this one German lake, letting your mind drift and pan across the vast expanses of time and space we have traveled together tonight. You have been a witness to a gallery of impossibilities, a collection of fossilized moments that, by all rights, should never have survived. You have stood in a Cretaceous lake in China and watched a two-headed baby reptile sink into the ash-filled water. It was a fossil of a biological impossibility, a life that could not have been lived, a developmental mistake that should have vanished instantly. Yet, it was preserved with the detail of a blueprint, a testament to a perfect volcanic trap. You have huddled in a burrow deep beneath the cracked earth of a Triassic wasteland, a world scoured by the greatest extinction event in history. You watched two entirely different creatures, a proto-mammal and an ancient amphibian, find a shared, peaceful sanctuary from the harsh world outside. It was a fossil of a behavioral impossibility, a moment of quiet cohabitation that defied the brutal logic of predator and prey, preserved by the sudden violence of a flash flood. You have traveled to a cold Siberian cave in the not-so-distant past, a home shared by different kinds of humans. You looked at a sliver of bone, a fragment so unremarkable it was almost thrown away. Yet, it held the ghost of an impossible identity. It was the fossil of a first-generation child of two worlds, the direct offspring of a Neanderthal and a Denisovan. Her story was not written in the shape of her bones, but in the miraculous, near-eternal code of her DNA. From there, you journeyed to the Badlands of North America to stand in the presence of the dinosaur mummies. You saw the Sternberg hadrosaur, the incredible Leonardo, and the stunningly lifelike Borealopelta. These were fossils of a visible impossibility, resurrecting not just the skeletons, but the very skin, scales, armor, and even the true colors of these giants. They transformed abstract monsters into plausible animals, their secrets preserved by arid winds and ancient seas. And finally, you returned to our German lake to witness the turtles, a fossil that captured the impossibility of an action, a fleeting private moment in the great cycle of life, immortalized by a silent, toxic cloud. Each of these fossils is a masterpiece of taphonomy, the science of preservation. Each one required a unique and staggeringly improbable chain of events to reach you. The right life, the right death, the right burial, the right preservation, and finally, the right person to find it. The history of paleontology is filled with stories of such people, like the mainstream historical figure Mary Anning, a self-taught working-class woman in early 19th century England whose brilliant eye for fossils uncovered the first great sea monsters and changed our understanding of the past. It is a science built on the luck and dedication of the sharp-eyed observer. All these stories, from the genetic to the visible, are being unraveled by the combined power of modern science. The scientific evidence is no longer just in the shape of a bone. It is in the geochemistry of the surrounding rock, the carbon films on a dinosaur's scales, the collagen fingerprints in a bone fragment, and the sequence of base pairs in a strand of ancient DNA. This flood of new information has fueled a debate about the nature of the science itself. Historians still argue whether the history of paleontology is a story of slow, incremental progress, or a history punctuated by these revolutionary jackpot fossils that completely rewrite the textbooks overnight. Each of these impossible fossils is, in its own way, a Lazarus. They are not just creatures, but entire concepts we had thought were extinct, lost forever to the ravages of deep time. The color of a dinosaur, a moment of peace between enemies, the genetic proof of our own hybrid ancestry. These are ideas resurrected from the dead. It is a quirky but profound thought that every fossil is a letter from a lost world. But these fossils are the full, illustrated stories, the ones that were never meant to be sent. They are the ultimate survivors, the winners of a cosmic lottery with odds too vast to calculate. And they are our only tangible link to the astonishing depth and strangeness of the story of life on our planet. As you let the final image of the turtles fade, sinking into the soft, dark mud of that ancient lake, allow your mind to float free from any single time or place. You have traveled tonight across an ocean of deep time, an abyss so vast that the entire history of our own species is but a tiny, flickering light on its distant shore. You can feel the weight of these immense ages settling around you now, not as a burden, but as a deep and quiet hush, a silence that has been accumulating for millions upon millions of years. Think of the silence of that early Cretaceous lake bed, where the fine volcanic ash drifted down like a gentle, ceaseless snow, covering the small, two-headed creature in a blanket of gray. For 125 million years, it rested in that perfect stillness, its impossible form held safe in the stone as entire continents drifted and great mountain ranges rose and fell above it. All the sound and fury of the world, the rise of the mammals, the coming of the ice, the dawn of humanity, all of it passed by unheard, unfelt, in the profound, patient silence of its geological tomb. Think, too, of the quiet within that Triassic burrow after the terrifying roar of the flash flood had passed. For the two unlikely companions, the cynodont and the amphibian, the world simply went from a moment of shared, peaceful darkness to an eternal, silent one. They lay there, pressed together, as the mud around them slowly hardened to rock, their unique story of desperation and shelter held in a single, serene pose. The world outside was reborn from the ashes of the great dying, life slowly and tentatively returning to fill the void. But in their small chamber, time had stopped. There, sirs, is a silence that stretches back 252 million years, a quiet so deep it is almost a tangible presence. Each of these stories you have witnessed is a tiny island of knowledge in that great, silent ocean of what has been lost forever. For every perfect mummy, a billion other dinosaurs turned to dust. For every Denny, a million other ancient humans left behind not a single readable trace. For every pair of turtles, a trillion other fleeting moments of life vanished without an echo. The fossil record is not a history of what was. It is a miraculous and fragmentary archive of what, against all odds, managed to survive the overwhelming forces of erasure. And yet, the very fact that we can know these stories is a wonder in itself. That we can hold a sliver of bone from a long-vanished girl and learn the story of her parents. That we can look at the skin of a dinosaur and know its color. That we can see a moment of shared shelter between two alien creatures from a lost world. This is the unique magic of our own brief moment in time. Our curious minds and the patient, clever tools we have built are like lanterns that can be lowered into that deep, dark well of the past, illuminating these small, incredible scenes. So let the vastness of that time wash over you now. Let the sharp details of the scales and the bones and the DNA sequences begin to soften and blur. Let them become gentle, dream-like echoes in your mind. The frantic struggle for survival, the sudden violence of death, the patient work of discovery, all of that can now fade away, leaving behind only a quiet sense of awe. You are connected by a thin and almost invisible thread of understanding to these incredibly distant lives. Their stories, once locked away in silent stone, have been told. And now, as they drift back into the quiet of the past, you can let your own mind drift with them into a place of rest and stillness. The journey is nearly over. The great silence of the earth is waiting to welcome you into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. And so, you can let your mind come to rest. The long journey is over. You have traveled through the deepest corridors of time and witnessed the preservation of moments that existed on the far side of an almost unimaginable gulf of silence. Now, in the final quiet moments before sleep, you can simply sit with the feeling these stories have left behind, a gentle sense of wonder at the sheer, improbable richness of the past. Think of the fossils themselves, now resting in the quiet, climate-controlled darkness of museum collections all around the world. Think of that small slab of shale from China, holding within it the perfect sad form of the two-headed lizard. It is a sleeping stone now, its brief, confused story held in a delicate fretwork of mineral and carbon. It no longer feels the cool water of its Cretaceous lake, nor the gentle rain of volcanic ash. It rests, its tale of a life that could not be, now told and understood, its purpose fulfilled. Think of that heavy, cylindrical plug of sandstone from the Karoo Basin, a fossilized home still holding its two unlikely residents. The Thrinaxodon and the Broomistega are still there, curled together in their final shared repose. The terror of the flash flood is a distant, momentary echo, faded into the silence of 250 million years. The harsh Triassic sun no longer beats down upon the cracked earth above them. They are safe now, in a stillness far deeper and more permanent than the one they sought on that long-ago day. Their story of a desperate shared sanctuary has been heard. Think of that tiny, powerful fragment of a young girl's finger. Denny's bone sits in a sterile vial in a laboratory, a humble relic that completely rewrote the story of our own family. The immense cold world of the mammoth steppe is gone. The great beasts she would have seen are gone. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans, her two peoples, are gone from the world as living, breathing cultures. But her bone remains, a quiet but unshakable testament to the fact that they were here, and that they were a part of us. Her voice, silent for 90,000 years, has finally spoken, and it has told us who we are. And think of the great mummies, the glorious textured bodies of the dinosaurs. They lie now in their custom-made cradles, their reddish-brown skin and mighty armor no longer needing to fear the great predators of their age. The world they knew, with its strange, flowering plants and its vast, ancient forests, is a ghost. But they remain, not as ghosts, but as tangible physical proof of that lost world's magnificence. Their lifelike forms are a bridge across time, allowing us to see them not as monsters, but as animals, in all their unexpected and beautiful complexity. You don't need to hold on to the names anymore. The Hyphalosaurus, the Borealopelta, the Allaeochelys. You don't need to remember the dates, the millions and hundreds of millions of years. All of those details can begin to dissolve now, like footprints in the sand at the edge of a quiet sea. What remains is the feeling, the gentle weight of all that time, and the quiet awe at the fact that these stories, these tiny, fragile moments from a world of deep silence, could ever reach you at all. The patient work of the scientists is done for the night. The museums are dark and still. The fossils themselves are at rest. And now, their stories told, they can fade back into the soft, quiet darkness from which they came, their journey and yours, now complete. And as you let the last of these ancient images dissolve, you can feel your own journey coming to a gentle, quiet end. The immense weight of deep time, the millions and hundreds of millions of years, can now lift and float away, leaving behind only a profound and peaceful calm. The roar of the Triassic flash flood has softened into a distant, soothing hum. The darkness of the Siberian cave has become a warm and comforting blanket around you. The still, deep water of the German lake is now a placid, tranquil pool, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting nothing but a quiet, starry sky. There are no more stories to be told tonight. There are no more mysteries to solve. The work of the world is done. And all that remains is the simple, easy, and natural act of letting go. You can feel the last of your thoughts begin to unmoor, drifting away like soft, puffy clouds across a twilight sky. You can feel the gentle, rhythmic pull of your own breathing, a slow and steady tide that is carrying you out into a calm and peaceful ocean of sleep. Let the current take you. Let the gentle darkness enfold you. There is nothing left to do but to rest, to drift, and to dream.